Spain holds more secrets than it seems. Hidden behind the grandeur of its cathedrals and the colorful festivities are forgotten chronicles, misunderstood signs, and ancient fears left in the rocks and underground. It's a journey into time, where every stone can tell a story that those who feared to write down. The Altamira Caves and their second layer. When 19th century archaeologists first entered the Altamira Hall, illuminated by the flickering light of torches, they saw on the vaults a world created long before humans learned to build cities. Enormous bison, deer, and enigmatic figures, seemingly moving in a dance, were astonishing in their vibrant colors. No one could have imagined then that a century and a half later, another hidden layer would be revealed beneath these images, as if the earth itself had decided to preserve a double memory of its ancient inhabitants. This discovery occurred in the 21st century, when a group of Spanish researchers used infrared scanning technology to analyze pigments. Beneath the limestone layers, not just repeating contours emerged, but entire new scenes painted by hands that possibly predated the first known Paleolithic artists. Some were scratched, others applied with ochre and manganese paints, but their form and style were noticeably different from the classic images of Altamira. The most striking thing was that some of these hidden figures didn't match the anatomy of real animals. Creatures with elongated limbs and double horns were discovered, reminiscent of something from myth, not nature. Scientists cautiously hypothesized that this might represent an early layer of symbolic thinking, where artists conveyed not only the visible, but also an inner representation of the spirit world. When laboratory analysis revealed that the new layer predated the original by approximately 10,000 years, the debate flared up again. Altamira, it turned out, was not simply a gallery of Paleolithic art, but an archive in which humanity was rewriting itself. Some saw this as evidence of two waves of settlement in Iberia, an ancient and a more recent one. Others suggested it represented an unbroken tradition, in which generations of artists added new lines over old ones, without erasing the memory of their ancestors. The handprints were a key detail. They have long been known in the top layer, red silhouettes of hands like the creator's signatures. But beneath them, others were found, smaller, with stretched fingers, as if someone had pressed the hands at different times, or even attempted to convey movement. Analysis of the pigment composition revealed a rare mixture of hematite and charcoal, indicating a unique technique used only in certain regions of Europe. Some researchers have noted a repeating spiral-like symbol found in several areas of the lower layer. Its location coincided with natural rock outcrops, creating the impression of light rotating when viewed by a flickering fire. Perhaps this very sight inspired ancient people to perform rituals associated with the sun, time, or the transition between worlds. There are local legends that Altamira shepherds, as early as the 18th century, heard strange sounds, like the echo of knocking or breathing from the depths. At the time, these were considered fairy tales, but modern geologists confirm beneath the main halls, there really are cavities connected by narrow cracks. Perhaps the ancient artists felt the tremors of the earth beneath their feet and perceived them as the presence of someone else, not visible, but palpable. Archaeologists have attempted to explain why the lower layer was so thoroughly concealed. Some have suggested that a collapse of the ceiling during the Ice Age obscured the old drawings, and that later descendants accidentally chose the same spot for their own images. Others believe it was a deliberate act, a symbolic overlay of old knowledge with new. Altamira then becomes not just a cave of art, but a unique temple of successive eras, where each civilization left its mark on the previous one, as if asserting its right to speak on behalf of the land. One discovery caused particular excitement. Traces of human figures were discovered in the lower layer at the edge of the vault. There were only two of them, elongated, faceless, but with pronounced shoulders and arms extended forward. These silhouettes did not resemble the usual depictions of hunters and had no attributes. They seemed more like shadows than people. Perhaps the ancient artists were depicting not themselves, but some beings standing between man and beast. When archaeologists first saw these contours, many of them admitted to feeling a strange sense of being watched. It was as if the past, still alive, was peering out from beneath the limestone. Altamira again reminded them that time is not a straight line, but a circle, where each era breathes beneath the layers of the next. Access to the lower level is now strictly restricted. Entrance is sealed behind hermetically sealed barriers to preserve the microclimate. Replicas of the images can only be seen in scientific reports, but those who have had the opportunity to stand beneath the vault and see the hidden figures say, the feeling of strange silence and presence is indescribable. This place reminds us that Spain is not only a land of sun and bullfighting, but also a country where the past never truly disappears, merely biding its time beneath layers of stone. Underground city under Toledo. Toledo has long been called the heart of ancient Spain, a city where centuries have layered like the pages of an old book. Here, beneath the cobblestone streets leading to the cathedral, lies something more than just ordinary catacombs. As early as the 19th century, archaeologists discovered the first entrances to underground galleries, but no one suspected that beneath the city lay an entire invisible world, extending deep underground like a reflection of Toledo in the stone shadows. These passages, vaults, and halls were long considered to be cellars dating back to the Reconquista. However, in the mid-20th century, researcher Antonio Garcia del Valle, while studying archival plans of the city, came across references to a lower quarter that had existed since Roman times. He then proposed that the catacombs of Toledo were merely the upper part of a much more extensive system dating back to the Roman Empire. His conjecture was initially dismissed as a fantasy until a ground-penetrating radar survey was conducted in the early 21st century. Enormous cavities were indeed discovered beneath the central part of the city, at a depth of over 30 meters. Some of them had irregular geometry, resembling man-made halls. Tool marks unlike those of the Middle Ages were found in the walls, and pottery fragments dating back to the 1st century BC were discovered in one of the tunnels. This became the first evidence that underground Toledo has Roman roots, perhaps even earlier. But the strangest thing began when the researchers reached the lower level. There, hidden beneath layers of rock, lay stone slabs covered in symbols that did not belong to any known script. The symbols were carved with incredible precision, many repeated in a specific sequence, as if conveying a message. The scientists noticed that these symbols often appeared alongside images of the sun and a serpentine line, suggesting a connection between light and the underworld. One of the corridors retains an arched passageway leading to a domed hall. There stood a stone pedestal surrounded by a circle of niches. Traces of soot and ash were found on the floor, indicating that some kind of rituals were performed here. Some have suggested that this is a cult hall of Roman Mithraism, while others believe it is a place of worship for even more ancient powers, predating the advent of writing on the Iberian Peninsula. An old legend has been preserved in the archives of Toledo, according to which, in the 12th century, city residents heard a bell-like sound coming from underground, even though there was no temple or tower there. At the time, this was attributed to the intervention of evil spirits, and many houses built over supposed underground chambers were considered cursed. Local legends claimed that some families moved out of such houses because the stone foundations beneath the floors began to vibrate at night, as if someone were moving there. Modern archaeologists have found a possible explanation for this phenomenon. In the lower levels of Toledo, there really is a system of natural fissures through which currents of warm air rise. At a certain humidity, these currents create low-frequency sounds resembling a hum. But this rational explanation doesn't negate the strange coincidence. In the very same places where these sounds are recorded, the walls are decorated with ancient symbols of the sun and the serpent. The section located beneath the former archbishop's palace is considered particularly mysterious. Several unmarked sarcophagi, sealed with lids made from a single piece of limestone, were discovered there. When opened, they were found to be empty, but traces of fabric soaked in something resembling oil or resin remained on the interior surface. Chemical analysis revealed a rare combination of plant resins, similar to those used in North Africa in the 1st centuries AD. This led researchers to speculate that Toledo once housed a sanctuary where rituals similar to Egyptian funerary traditions were performed. With each new discovery, the city beneath the city revealed more and more contradictions. Stone staircases leading to nowhere, halls whose walls were covered with the finest stripes of gold, as if attempting to reflect the light. Holes in the ceilings, located beneath the very streets where cathedrals and ancient houses stand today. Perhaps these shafts were used for stargazing, or perhaps they were intended for spiritual practices no one remembers anymore. Some historians have hypothesized that Toledo was not just a city, but a unique model of the world, where each level is a reflection of the heavenly realm. The top is for the living, the middle is for memory, and the bottom is for secrets. And if this logic is to be believed, the deepest corridors conceal the most ancient knowledge, which no one has yet been able to access. Today, the descents into these underground chambers are closed to tourists, and only a few archaeologists have been granted permission to work there. Reports describe the air at the lower level as heavy and dry, the temperature remains almost constant year-round, and the sound of footsteps is seemingly muffled by the walls themselves. The place seems to resist human presence, a reminder that Toledo preserves not only the history of Spain, but also a part of it that has been preferred to remain unspoken. And when the cathedral bells ring over the old city, their echo goes down into the stone, where underground Toledo still sleeps, preserving its secrets, imperishable, like the memory of the earth itself. The lost monasteries of the Sierra de Cazorla. Deep in the Sierra de Cazorla, where the air smells of pine and limestone, there are places not found on any modern map. These lands seem eternal, as if time has passed them by. Here, among the cliffs and gorges, monasteries once stood, of which almost no trace remains. All that remains are the fragments of moss-covered walls and the occasional legend of brothers who retreated into silence, never to return. Shepherds were the first to speak of them in the mid-19th century, when they discovered a gate in one of the ravines leading to an underground gallery carved into the limestone. Traces of frescoes remained on the walls, not colored, but painted with a kind of soot, depicting stars, crisscrossing lines, and stylized figures that were more reminiscent of ancient symbols than religious ones. No one could explain their origin, as Spanish monastic architecture of the time was always rich in ornamentation and sacred themes, but here, a strict simplicity reigned, almost unsettling in its silence. When archaeologists first examined these remains, they discovered that the walls and columns had been crafted using a method known only to early Christian monasteries of the 5th century. This meant that the monasteries existed long before the official establishment of the orders known from chronicles. But the strangest thing was that all the buildings seemed to have disappeared at once. The chronicles of neighboring settlements contain no mention of destruction, fires, or the displacement of monks. It was as if they had been erased from history in a single stroke. One of the oldest legends tells of the so-called Brothers of Silence living in these places. They took no vows, accepted no pilgrims, and maintained no households. Their lives consisted of observing the sky and keeping records, which are now lost. It is believed that early astronomical schools may have existed here, where spirituality and science were combined. This explains why symbols resembling star charts have been preserved on the walls of underground corridors, although their accuracy exceeds the level of knowledge of the time. During excavations in the late 20th century, fragments of ceramic vessels engraved with numbers and figures were found. Some researchers have suggested that this was a special monastic measurement system, possibly used to calculate solar cycles. Others have noted that many of the frescoes' lines align with the direction of dawn light on the vernal equinox, indicating the ritual significance of the structures. But the mystery of their disappearance remained. Why were these monasteries standing for centuries suddenly deserted? No one could give a definitive answer to this question. In old Inquisition records, there are several vague references to communities without a cross existing in the southern mountains and professing a silent faith. Perhaps they were the very Brothers of Silence. Some chroniclers claimed that they kept books banned by the church, and that a secret order was once issued to destroy their monasteries. Modern researchers find a different explanation. Climate change, slope collapse, isolation from the outside world. But there are also those who believe the monasteries disappeared in a different way, as if they had sunk underground themselves. Indeed, entrances leading to deep shafts filled with stone have been discovered beneath the ruins of some churches. Traces of carving are visible on the walls of these passages, as if someone deliberately sealed the entrance, afraid that what should have remained underground would emerge. At the beginning of the 21st century, an archaeological expedition from Granada discovered a vast cave beneath one of the mountain peaks, within which they found the remains of 7 sarcophagi. They were carved from solid blocks and oriented strictly east-west. No inscriptions, crosses, or ritual signs remained. The lids bore only traces of fire, as if someone had once attempted to open them, or, conversely, scorch them to seal them forever. Local legend says that after sunset, a faint glow can be seen over the mountains, as if the moon were reflected in the rock. Elders claim this is the light of the lamps the brothers left behind as they descended into the depths, and every year on a certain day, when a shadow falls directly over one of the old passages, The air in the gorge becomes thicker, as if the earth itself remembers those who once refused to live under the sun. The Sierra de Cazorla holds more than just ruins. These are the traces of people who chose silence over glory, and the stones that bore witness to their disappearance. Here, every stone seems to hold the breath of those who did not want to be found, and when the wind passes over the peaks, it seems to carry their words, a wordless prayer addressed to eternity. The secretive triangle of the Pyrenees. On the northern border of Spain, among the snow-capped peaks and mossy gorges of the Pyrenees, lies a region shunned by locals since ancient times. It's called Triangle, an area between three peaks where inexplicable events occur. Animals get lost here, compasses break, and at night, a dim glow can be seen on the slopes, emanating neither from fires nor from the stars. This place seems to live by its own laws, ignoring the passage of time and human presence. The first written records of strange phenomena in Triangle date back to the 16th century. One of the monastery chronicles records that a caravan of merchants set out for the mountains from the village of Santa Martio and never returned. Several weeks later, local shepherds found their carts and abandoned belongings on the trail, but no bodies or traces of people were found. This story gave rise to numerous legends about a mountain sinkhole where living creatures disappear. In the 20th century, when scientists began exploring the region, new evidence began to emerge. Pilots flying over the area reported that instruments began malfunctioning, compass needles were spinning, and radio signals were dying for no apparent reason. Several expeditions recorded magnetic field fluctuations several times higher than normal. Geologists attributed this to underground iron deposits, but such concentrations were not found in the rocks. An incident that occurred at the beginning of the 21st century was particularly mysterious. A group of researchers installed equipment to record geomagnetic waves. For the first 3 days, the data was stable, but then the instruments began recording pulsating pulses, repeating every 11 minutes. They resembled a heartbeat, increasing in intensity and then subsiding. Soon, the equipment failed completely. When the scientists ascended to the base, they found the ground around the camp covered in a thin layer of frost, even though the temperature had not dropped below freezing. It was as if the air had suddenly frozen from the inside. Locals claim to hear sounds resembling a distant choir in Triangle. Sometimes it's a quiet hum, sometimes sharp cries resembling human voices. Shepherds say their cattle avoid these slopes and stop long before the district's border, as if sensing an invisible barrier. Legend has it that the spirits of warriors who died during the time of the ancient Iberians are buried here, and that the land itself preserves their energy. Archaeologists surveying the surrounding area did indeed find the remains of a cyclopean wall on one of the peaks. Constructed without mortar, made of stones weighing several tons, the structure bears no signs of Roman or Moorish masonry, and the stonework techniques are reminiscent of the megaliths of Central Europe. One of the slabs bears an incised symbol of a triangle inscribed within a circle, hence the name of the area. When the sun rises over the peaks, a beam of light falls directly on the center of this symbol, creating the illusion of a glow. Some researchers have suggested that Triangle was an ancient sanctuary where rituals related to celestial cycles were performed. The alignment of the peaks aligns with the winter solstice, and the lines between them precisely point to ancient settlements long since vanished from the map. Perhaps this was sacred geometry, intended to connect Earth and sky. However, this cannot explain the magnetic anomalies. Geophysicists note that voids formed by ancient rock movements do exist beneath the area. Some cavities fill with water, forming underground lakes. Under certain conditions, the movement of water and minerals can create electric fields that affect instruments. But why the pulses occur with such perfect regularity, as if someone were turning on an invisible mechanism underground, remains a mystery. There's another version, a mystical one. Folklore from neighboring villages tells of luminous wanderers who come from the mountains and disappear, leaving no trace. They are described as cloaked figures, their faces hidden by hoods, and their hands emitting a faint glow. Sometimes they appear before storms or earthquakes, as if offering a warning. After such visits, residents have found scorched circles and traces of molten rock in the ground. No one knows whether this was a natural phenomenon or something else. Despite attempts to unravel the mystery, Triangle remains a zone of silence. There's no satellite reception, no navigation, and even cell phone service disappears after walking a few kilometers inland. People who've been there report that time loses its normal pace, clocks gain or lose, and the sensations of sleep and wakefulness become confused. Some return feeling like they've only spent an hour in the mountains, when in fact, a whole morning has passed. Today, Spanish authorities officially closed access to the central part of Triangle, declaring it a nature reserve. But researchers who visited before the ban insist that this place is not just a geological anomaly, but an ancient nexus where the forces of earth and sky intersect. And if you peer into the fog above the peaks, you can see how the triangle of mountains outlines an invisible figure in the sky, a sign that seems to remind people that not everything in this world defies explanation. Cryptograms in the monastery of San Juan de la Peña. High in the mountains of Aragon, amid sheer cliffs and pine groves, the monastery of San Juan de la Peña lies hidden beneath a stone vault. Its walls seem to grow out of the mountain, blending so seamlessly with the rock that it seems the monks didn't build it, but carved it directly into the earth. This monastery has long been revered as one of the most mysterious places in Spain, as it was here that inscriptions were discovered that no one has yet been able to decipher. These inscriptions, known as cryptograms, have sparked debate among historians, linguists, and mystics for centuries. The history of these signs began in the late 18th century when, during restoration work, a slab covered in rows of small indentations was discovered under the marble floor of an old corridor. Initially, these were thought to be tool marks, but a closer examination revealed that each indentation was of exactly the same depth and shape. Several more such slabs were later found, all forming a kind of text that was illegible either horizontally or vertically. Scientists hypothesized that it might be a cipher. Experts in ancient languages were brought in, but no known alphabet matched the pattern of the symbols. Moreover, ceramic tablets were found near the slabs, bearing the same indentations, but in a different order. This led to the hypothesis that it might be a counting system, or a calendar. However, it was later discovered that the number of symbols does not correspond to any known cycle, neither solar nor lunar. Some researchers believe the monks of San Juan were attempting to create a universal language free of words and sounds. It has been suggested that these symbols concealed an attempt to express the structure of faith, translating spiritual knowledge into mathematical form. Perhaps this is why some slabs feature drawings of circles and triangles, as if the monks were combining religion and geometry into a single message. But there's another theory. Old chronicles from the 14th century tell of stone books, supposedly kept in the monastery's dungeons and brought from the east. If true, the cryptograms could have been copies of an unknown script brought to Spain by pilgrims or crusaders. Some signs do resemble cuneiform, but the structure of the text remains unique. At the beginning of the 20th century, a French expedition arrived at the monastery, armed with the latest equipment available at the time. They noticed that some of the slabs were emitting a weak magnetic field, as if metal were hidden within the stone. A theory then arose that these slabs were not simply information carriers, but rather part of a mechanism, a kind of resonator amplifying sound or vibration. Perhaps the monks used them for meditation, or to create a special acoustic effect during prayer. One of the monastery's halls truly has unusual acoustics. If you speak a word in the corner, the echo reverberates under the dome, forming a long, drawn-out sound. Acoustic researchers confirm that the room's architecture is designed to enhance resonance. Whether this is a coincidence or a deliberate design remains a mystery. Locals still tell stories of nighttime glows in the monastery's windows, even though it is no longer in use. They say that sometimes a quiet chant can be heard from within, as if the walls remember the prayers that were uttered here many centuries ago. When attempts were made to open the lower catacombs in the 20th century, landslides blocked the way. Some passages collapsed, and further exploration was abandoned. But even among the discovered fragments, there's one that's particularly troubling. On one of the slabs, lying apart from the others, is a symbol carved resembling a human face, devoid of eyes. It appears to be looking into the stone rather than outward. Beneath it is a word carved that cannot be deciphered, but linguists suggest it could mean witness. Perhaps this imagery reflects the meaning of the entire cipher. The monks were attempting to convey not a message, but the very idea of vision, understanding without sight, knowledge without words. When modern laser scanning was conducted at the monastery, it was discovered that the symbols were not randomly placed. When their lines were connected, a figure emerged remarkably similar to the constellation map, visible over Aragon in the 12th century. This raises the question, were the cryptograms a means of recording the celestial order linking the monastery to the cosmos? San Juan de la Peña stands in the shadow of the mountain, as if sheltering itself from the sunlight. Its walls are a page inscribed with the thoughts of an ancient man seeking to understand the language of the world. Perhaps these incisions were never intended to be read. Perhaps they were a prayer addressed not to God, but to time itself. And if one day someone does decipher these cryptograms, perhaps they will hear not words, but a sound, low and drawn out, the same one that still echoes beneath the monastery's stone vault. The Phantom Monastery in Montserrat. Montserrat rises above Catalonia like a stone tooth cutting through the sky. Its jagged peaks resemble frozen waves, and in the fog, they seem alive. For centuries, a sacred place stood here, a monastery considered the heart of the Spanish faith. But, besides the famous monastery, visited by pilgrims, legends mention another, a ghostly one, hidden somewhere on the slopes, inaccessible to the human eye. The existence of a second monastery was first mentioned in the 16th century. Old chronicles reported that a group of monks disappeared during a storm while descending into the valley. Their bodies were never found, but several shepherds claimed to have seen glowing windows among the rocks days after their disappearance. Since then, this place has been known as a ghost monastery, appearing only to those who seek it not for glory, but for truth. In the 19th century, explorer Ramon Font, while studying old maps, noticed that some publications mentioned a structure called the Second Hermitage. He went into the mountains and spent several weeks there. When Font returned, he looked exhausted and barely spoke. A short entry was found in his diary. "I heard bells, but I saw no walls." This phrase became one of the first modern accounts of a phenomenon that would later be associated with Montserrat. Over time, the stories multiplied. People who spent the night in the mountains said that at night, reflections rose from the fog like candles in windows. Sometimes chants were heard, even though no one was nearby. Even climbers skeptical of such stories admitted that at certain hours, a strange vibration was felt in the rocks, as if an invisible organ were playing a note too low for human hearing. Scientists attempted to explain the phenomenon by natural factors. Geologists pointed to cavities in the rock that, when blown by the wind, could create acoustic resonances. Physicists suggested that light reflection from wet rocks could create the illusion of a glow, but no theory explained the fact that the phenomenon was observed only on certain days of the year, specifically when the sun rises directly over Montserrat's central peak. There's an old legend that a second monastery was built in the 11th century, when some of the brethren abandoned the main monastery. These monks, it said, considered the temple too rich and decided to retreat to the mountains to serve in solitude. They chose a spot between the rocks where sunlight fell only a few hours a day. There, they carved out cells and created a small sanctuary hidden from view. Over time, it was forgotten, and only rare mentions of stone enclosures remain in pilgrims' records. When geophysical surveys began on Montserrat in the 20th century, an anomaly was indeed discovered beneath one of the slopes, a huge cavity filled with dense air. An attempt to penetrate it was unsuccessful. The passage was too narrow, and a collapse began within hours. Access to the area has since been prohibited. However, instruments detected weak electromagnetic pulses matching the frequency of bell ringing. Locals say that sometimes during evening services at the original monastery, a distant echo is heard, as if another church somewhere in the mountains is responding. Priests prefer not to discuss these coincidences, but several monks have admitted to hearing a second ringing. One of them once said that this ringing comes not from far away but from deep within, as if the rocks were praying with them. A story that occurred in the mid-20th century attracted particular attention. A group of tourists got lost in the fog and, trying to find their way, saw a light in a crevice. They approached and made out the silhouettes of arches and columns, illuminated by a soft glow. When one of them stepped forward, the light faded, and before them lay only a wall of stone. They all later claimed to have seen the same thing, a building with a dome and a cross standing in the void. Some esotericists claim that Montserrat is an energetic nexus connecting earth and heaven. They believe the Phantom Monastery exists in another reality, and from time to time, the boundary between worlds becomes thinner, allowing reflections of the invisible to be glimpsed. These ideas are often dismissed as mystical, but even among scientists, there are those who acknowledge that Montserrat possesses unique geophysics, where magnetic currents create conditions for optical and acoustic illusions found nowhere else in Europe. And yet, there remains something more than science can explain. Everyone who has been to Montserrat speaks of a sense of silence that doesn't frighten, but rather calls. When the sun sets, the peaks are bathed in golden light, and it seems as if the mountain itself is breathing. Perhaps it is then that, between the layers of time and space, that very monastery emerges, not from stone, but from memory. He doesn't appear to be found. He reminds us that faith, like light, can exist even where there are no walls. And perhaps that's why Montserrat remains a symbol of Spanish mystery, a place where the boundary between the earthly and the heavenly remains barely discernible. The mystery of the burial of the Count of Villafuerte. In the heart of Old Castile, where the hills are covered with ancient oaks and roads lose themselves among abandoned estates, stands the dilapidated palace of the Villafuerte family. Its facade is chipped by time, the windows are boarded up, but inside, a whiff of former wealth still lingers. Nobility once gathered here, music played, maids carried silver plates, and torches burned on the walls. But after the death of the last count, in the mid-18th century, everything changed. It is said that, on the night of his burial, a light like the northern lights shone over the estate, and since then no one has been able to find his grave, although his tombstone remains. The history of the Villafuerte family dates back to the 15th century. They were a family of warriors and patrons of the arts, equally devoted to the crown and their own pride. The last of their number, Count Alejandro de Villafuerte, was distinguished by his strange character. He avoided court intrigues, avoided guests, and spent the last years of his life in a closed circle of servants and scribes, working on a book that has never been found. According to legend, he believed that a person can leave a mark if they learn to capture not words, but thoughts themselves. When the Count died, his body was taken to the family chapel, located at the foot of the hill. The burial took place in the presence of a few witnesses, a few priests and servants. Since then, no one has opened the tomb. However, several decades later, one of the descendants, determined to reconstruct the family history, ordered the sarcophagus open to ensure its safety. When the stone slab was lifted, it was found to be empty. There were no remains, no clothing, no objects typically associated with the deceased. It looked as if the tomb had never been used. On the wall next to the sarcophagus hung the family coat of arms, a silver lion with a sword, surrounded by vines. When descendants attempted to remove it, they discovered a hidden bas-relief beneath, two intertwined snakes, a symbol never used in the family coat of arms. Above it was carved the word in Old Castilian, retorno, meaning return. From that moment on, the legend of the Count became not just a family mystery, but a true mystical myth. There are three versions of what happened to Alejandro de Villafuerte's body. The first, the simplest, says the body was secretly moved to another location at the behest of the Count himself. Old documents contain a letter in which he asked that the flesh be left to the earth, but the spirit be returned to whence it came. This may have been a metaphor, but it was taken literally. The second version claims that the Count's remains were stolen to sell the jewelry, but nothing of value was missing from the tomb, as there was nothing there. The third theory, the strangest, emerged in the late 19th century when one of the restorers working on the palace discovered a secret passage behind the fireplace. The corridor led to a small hall, the walls of which were covered in inscriptions in an incomprehensible language. In the center stood an empty sarcophagus, carved from dark marble. Its lid was the same shape and size as the one in the family chapel, as if someone had created an exact replica. The idea then arose that the Count's true tomb was hidden here, within the house, and that his body had never left its walls. In the 20th century, archaeologists conducted an examination of the hall. Radiocarbon dating revealed that the sarcophagus was created no later than the 17th century, long before the Count's death. A barely discernible handprint was found on the lid, as if someone had touched the stone while it was still soft. Chemical analysis of the surface revealed traces of a rare mineral, similar to that used to make paints for the frescoes of the monastery of San Juan de la Peña. This coincidence gave rise to a new theory. The Count was associated with an order that studied secret symbols and ancient languages, and his burial was part of a ritual whose meaning has been lost. A record preserved in the Inquisition archive mentions de Villafuerte's name in the context of an investigation into metaphysical practices. It states that he observed the forms of light and shadow, seeking to capture the moment when the soul separates from the body. This gave rise to the belief that the Count was attempting to unravel the mystery of death not as an end, but as a transition. Therefore, his disappearance began to be perceived as an experiment, as if he had chosen the method of disappearing himself, leaving only a sign of his presence. Testimonies from subsequent generations only deepened the mystery. In the early 20th century, one of the estate's caretakers reported hearing footsteps at night in the hall where the coat of arms hung. Sometimes he would see the glow of a candle and hear what sounded like someone turning the pages of a book. When the caretaker ventured in, he would find the sarcophagus open, its lid lying nearby on the floor. Not a single lock had been forced, not a single door open. Today, the Villafuerte Palace stands abandoned, and the entrance to the chapel is barred. Scholars who have attempted to study the tomb acknowledge that the architecture of the underground chamber defies conventional standards. Its vaults form a perfect dome, reflecting even a whisper. If a word is spoken, it echoes back, as if someone were repeating it from within the stone. The Count's mystery remains unsolved. Some believe he faked his death to withdraw from the world and complete his quest alone. Others believe he was a victim of his own experiments and dissolved into the very light he was trying to study. Still others claim he still guards his home, not with his body, but with what remains of a person after their last breath. When clouds gather over Castile, lightning often strikes the Villafuerte hill, and for a moment, the old coat of arms carved on the facade flashes silver. Locals say this is the Count's sign, not of vengeance or fear, but of reminder. After all, the mystery of his burial has long ceased to be a question of where his body lies. It is the story of how a man tried to conquer oblivion and perhaps truly overcame death, leaving his presence not in the earth, but in the stone itself, which never dies. Tower of the Winds in Zaragoza. On the outskirts of Zaragoza, where the modern city meets the ruins of the old quarter, rises an ancient tower known as the Tower of the Winds. Its appearance is unusual, an octagonal base, narrow windows facing the cardinal directions, and a dome pitted with the marks of time. No one knows exactly when it was built. Archives contain references to the tower as early as the 12th century, but some masonry elements are clearly of Roman origin, and the underground vaults are even older. Locals have long believed that this is not just an architectural structure, but a place of power, capable of hearing the breath of the wind and predicting the fate of the city. The first scientific study of the tower took place in the mid-19th century. The architect Del Campo noted that its shape mirrored the principles of ancient observatories. Each bay and each window was positioned to detect the wind direction during specific months of the year. He recorded that when the north wind blew, the stone walls emitted a quiet hum, similar to an organ note, while when the south wind blew, they produced a low, vibrating sound, like breathing. These phenomena could not be explained solely by the structure of the building, as there were no pipes or cavities within to create resonance. Later, researchers discovered a system of narrow tunnels extending to a considerable depth beneath the tower. They connect at the center, forming a circular chamber with a domed vault, where the temperature and humidity remain constant year-round. Ancient holes were found in the floor, from which air rose, as if the tower itself were breathing. When they first descended, one of the participants noticed that even in complete calm, the torch flame began to flicker, as if an invisible force were passing through the walls. There are ancient records indicating that, in the 16th century, the tower was used as a weather observation point. Monks from a nearby abbey kept diaries there, noting when the wind changed direction and linking these changes to political events. They believed the tower foretells wars and crop failures, diseases and storms. After several of their prophecies came true, the authorities banned such observations, fearing civil unrest. Over the centuries, the tower became steeped in legend. It was said that a spirit who controlled the winds lived beneath the dome, and that if you stood at the entrance at night, you could hear its call. Travelers reported that during strong storms, a bluish glow would flare up inside the tower. Scientists attribute this to the electrification of the air, but locals believe it is a manifestation of the power contained within the stone. In the early 20th century, archaeologist Manuel Romero excavated the base of the tower and discovered foundation remains dating to the Roman period. Among the rubble was a fragment of a marble slab with an inscription mentioning the word aura. This Latin name can be translated as breath or breath. It's possible that a sanctuary dedicated to the deity of the winds originally stood on this site. Later, Arab builders who came to Spain may have used the old foundation, constructing a new building on top of it, giving it an octagonal shape, symbolizing the balance between earth and sky. The tower's acoustics are particularly interesting. Modern engineers have measured sound vibrations and found that its walls amplify frequencies corresponding to the range of human breathing. When the wind blows in a certain direction, a rhythm reminiscent of inhaling and exhaling can be heard inside. This has led to the theory that the tower was created not as a defensive structure, but as an instrument, a huge musical resonator used for rituals. Perhaps art and science, faith and physics merged here. As for the ancients, the boundaries between them were non-existent. However, among the Zaragoza archives, there is one record that still stirs controversy. An old city council report from the 17th century mentions that during strong winds, the tower spoke a wordless language. Witnesses claimed to be able to discern phrases resembling prayers within. The clergy then declared the structure heretical and ordered the lower passages to be sealed. After this, the sounds ceased. Only in the late 20th century did researchers attempt to clear one of the tunnels, but after just a few days of work, a collapse forced them to abandon the excavations. Locals still believe the tower hears everything that happens around it. They say that on the eve of important events, before floods or earthquakes, the stones begin to hum. People feel a slight vibration, as if the heart of the city were beating faster. Some claim to have seen a pillar of light above the dome, as if the tower itself were sending a signal to the sky. Today, the Tower of the Winds has become a subject of scientific interest. A group of Spanish physicists conducted nighttime studies using ultra-sensitive microphones. The results were unexpected. Low-frequency sounds were indeed recorded inside the tower, matching the rhythm of changes in atmospheric pressure. This led to a bold hypothesis. Perhaps the tower's builders created an ancient barometer capable of predicting weather changes long before the invention of scientific instruments. But even this doesn't explain everything. Why does the structure react not only to the wind, but also to human presence? Experimenters note that when people enter, the acoustic pattern changes, as if the tower is listening. Perhaps its geometry conceals not only physics, but also memory. The memory of those who stood at its base for centuries, listening to its breath. As the sun sets, Zaragoza is bathed in a reddish light, and the tower seems alive. Its walls catch the last gusts of wind, and at that moment, a quiet, drawn-out sound can be heard, as if the earth itself were speaking a language humans have long since forgotten. The Tower of the Winds remains a reminder that sometimes a secret lies not in the stars, but in the very air passing through stone, carrying the echoes of centuries. The archives of the Inquisition, which disappeared in the 19th century. In the old part of Madrid, not far from the Plaza de San Domingo, there once stood a building that was rarely mentioned. It was low-slung, with narrow windows and thick red brick walls. Its doors remained closed even during the day, and at night, a faint candlelight filtered through the barred windows. It was the main archive of the Spanish Inquisition, a place where cases, denunciations, sentences, and documents concerning hundreds of people who disappeared without a trace during the dark centuries of ecclesiastical justice were kept. But when the government decided to open the archive to the public in the mid-19th century, it turned out that almost nothing remained inside. Thousands of volumes, preserved for centuries, had vanished without a trace, as if they had never existed. The first mention of the disappearance appeared in a report dated April 18, 1841. A commission appointed by royal decree arrived to inspect the building to transfer documents to a new state repository. When the doors were opened, the corridors were empty. Dust lay in an even layer, cobwebs hung from the ceilings, but the shelves stood bare. Not a single book, not a single sheet of paper. Only a few charred fragments lay on the floor, on which not a word was decipherable. The entire space resembled a shell from which its contents had been removed. At first they thought the archive had burned down, but a fire would have left traces of soot, and the walls were clean. Then they suspected theft, but it was impossible to imagine how such a large number of documents could have been removed undetected. In total, the inventory listed over 40,000 files and approximately 10,000 letters, including inquisitors' reports, reports on infidels, and secret church decrees. Dozens of carts would have been needed to move them, and the gates of the quarter were guarded even at night. Later, historians found a strange account in an old letter by the priest Francisco de Torres. He wrote that shortly before the archives disappeared, an unknown monk came to him and uttered a phrase that seemed nonsensical to him at the time. The book returns to the earth to await the new sun. Only years later did researchers begin to suspect that this might be a hint that the archives had not been destroyed, but hidden. But where? No one knew. When the search began, the dungeons attracted attention. There were indeed vaults beneath the building, extending several levels. Iron doors were discovered there, leading to sealed chambers. One of them was forced open, revealing empty boxes bearing the coats of arms of the Inquisition. Traces of moisture remained on the walls, but there was no paper. Only on one of the boxes was the word silencio, silence, written in chalk. No one could explain who had left this inscription or why. There was a theory that the archive was taken to the Vatican. A coincidence of dates supported this theory. That year, a group of Holy See representatives officially engaged in church reform arrived in Spain. However, no Vatican document confirms the transfer, and subsequent attempts to gain access to their repositories were denied. Researchers working with publicly available collections claimed that no Spanish files were contained there. Some scholars suggest that the archive did not physically disappear, but was deliberately destroyed. Proponents of this theory believe that, when the Inquisition was closed, many officials feared the names of those who had once participated in interrogations and executions would be made public. The documents could have contained orders signed by influential families, and if they had become public knowledge, it would have ruined the reputations of dozens of families. It's possible that the archive was simply burned, but not in the city, but somewhere outside it. However, there is another, far more disturbing version. It is based on the memoirs of a scribe named Alonso Vela, who served in the Inquisition in the late 18th century and was responsible for correspondence. In his old age, he claimed that some of the documents were not related to legal cases. Among them were descriptions of phenomena recorded by the inquisitors, strange lights emanating from monasteries, people disappearing during prayer, objects defying the laws of nature. These records were labeled Arcana Fidei, secrets of faith. If they truly existed, they could have posed a threat to the Church, as they contain not accusations, but rather testimonies of incomprehensible phenomena that the Inquisition could not explain. According to another legend, one of the monks cataloging the archives managed to hide some of the papers before his death. His descendant, who lived in the 20th century, claimed that his family had kept a small scroll with a flame-shaped seal. When it was opened, it revealed a map of Spain with 3 places marked with crosses: Toledo, Burgos, and Zaragoza. All of these coincided with cities where, according to historians, there were branches of the archive. Perhaps the documents were dispersed and hidden in the underground vaults of old monasteries. In the 20th century, archaeologists became involved. In Toledo, during the restoration of the old church of San Miguel, an iron chest, secured with rusty locks, was found under the altar. Inside were fragments of parchment, barely preserved in text. On one of them, it was possible to read, "When the tongue of the wind opens, fire becomes word." There was no context or date, but the lines were written in the same handwriting used by the scribes of the Inquisition. This was the first real evidence that at least part of the archive might have survived. This discovery sparked a new wave of rumors. It was said that the archive hadn't simply disappeared, but had been moved to a place where fire and wind converge, perhaps underground thermal springs, or the Tabernas Desert, where ancient caves lie hidden beneath thick sand. There were even reports of strange discoveries: stone slabs engraved with texts resembling court orders, but written in symbols no one recognized. Today, the building that housed the archive no longer exists. A small park now stands in its place, and modern utilities run underground. But archaeologists who have examined the soil claim that deeper, impassable tunnels remain, filled with construction debris. Magnetic field fluctuations are periodically detected in these tunnels, as if metal were still present. Perhaps these tunnels still contain boxes covered in the dust of centuries, containing a history that was preferred to be forgotten. The Inquisition's archives have become a symbol of how easily a people's memory can be erased. Spain has lived through centuries of light and darkness, but it is in the disappearance of these documents that many see the final line between past and present. Perhaps the archives have not been destroyed. Perhaps they simply await the moment when humanity is ready to hear what it once considered heresy. And as the wind blows through the streets of Madrid, passing through the grated canals, it seems to carry a quiet whisper, an echo of voices once inscribed in books that have vanished but not been silenced. Firestones of La Mancha. Amid the endless plains of La Mancha, where the wind swirls dust over dry roads and the horizons seem endless, there's a place locals call the Valley of the Firestones. At first glance, it's just a cluster of hills covered in scrub, but beneath their surface lie deposits of rock that emit a faint heat even at night. Ancient chronicles mention them as early as the 16th century, describing strange flashes of light that appeared after thunderstorms. Scientists have repeatedly attempted to explain this as a natural phenomenon, but the more they studied it, the more it became a mystery, defying both geology and physics. The first official expedition took place in 1893. Geologist Rodrigo Valdez, a skeptic known for his precise observations, wrote in his diary, "At night, the earth burns from within." He described the rocks as emitting a dim reddish glow that persisted even after rain. When the explorers attempted to collect samples, they found them cold to the touch, despite the warm surrounding soil. This discrepancy became the first in a series of unexplained properties of the valley. It was later discovered that the light is not constant. Sometimes it disappears for decades, then suddenly returns, accompanied by a subterranean rumble. In the 20th century, locals reported hearing a drawn-out sound, similar to breathing, emanating from underground before an earthquake or storm. Some claim to have seen tongues of blue flame rise from crevices at night. These accounts were long considered folklore, until, in the mid-20th century, engineers drilling for a water supply encountered abnormally high levels of heat radiation from the deep layers. When scientists began analyzing the rocks, the results baffled them. The stones were composed of quartz, feldspar, and rare minerals, but contained no radioactive elements capable of generating heat. Moreover, when crushed and cooled, the glow disappeared, only to reappear when several fragments were combined. This led the researchers to believe that the phenomenon was not related to the chemical composition, but to the structure of the rocks themselves, which could accumulate and release energy. Some suggested that a source of electromagnetic waves existed underground, interacting with the rocks like a natural battery. However, archaeologists were interested in something else. Traces of ancient settlements were found around the valley, and on some rocks were carved symbols resembling stylized lightning bolts and spirals. Radiocarbon dating showed that these images were over 3,000 years old. It seems the ancient inhabitants were already aware of the valley's unusual properties and may have revered it as a sacred place. Legends from nearby villages say that the Heart of the Sun was located here, a place where the earth communicates with the sky through fire. In the mid-20th century, archaeologist Jose Martinez discovered the remains of a circular sanctuary beneath one of the hills. In the center was a stone altar, surrounded by a circle of baked stones. At the base of the sanctuary, a tunnel was discovered leading to a small cave, the walls of which were covered with a thin, glassy crust. It looked as if the stone had been melted by an unknown heat. However, the melting point of granite is too high for such a thing to have occurred naturally. The hypothesis of an ancient meteorite was then put forward. However, no traces of iron or nickel, the invariable companions of meteorite falls, were found in the soil layers. Later, a theory emerged about underground gases igniting upon contact with air. However, air analysis showed no flammable impurities. Furthermore, the glow was often observed without any odor or smoke, and sometimes even in complete calm. Then, speculation began about the piezoelectric effect. Compressing quartz can indeed cause an electrical discharge. If there is movement of rocks underground, the friction of the crystals can create the glow. But this explanation ignored the fact that the phenomenon sometimes occurs without seismic activity. At the beginning of the 21st century, continuous monitoring equipment was installed in the valley. Cameras recorded flashes of light emanating from the ground, but no instrument pinpointed the source. Only electromagnetic wave sensors detected short pulses resembling signals. Their frequency matched fluctuations recorded in other parts of the planet, in areas where ancient megalithic structures had been discovered. This coincidence gave rise to a bold idea. Perhaps the ancient builders were aware of such anomalies and chose powerful sites where the Earth's energy was released. There's an ancient legend that a man who could light stones lived in these parts. He could supposedly strike the ground with a staff, and a flame would erupt in response. The legend seems like a fairy tale, but scientists have found evidence that fire-related rituals were performed here in ancient times. Vessels containing ash and traces of sulfur were discovered in one of the burials, dating back to the Bronze Age. Perhaps the ancients used these stones as part of a sacred rite, believing they connected a person with the powers of the underworld. There's also modern evidence that's hard to believe. In 2007, tourists camping at the foot of the hill reported that their tent had heated up within minutes, as if a fire had been burning nearby. Meanwhile, the air temperature remained cool. In the morning, they discovered that the soil beneath them had turned black, and a light mark, resembling a handprint, had appeared on one of the stones. Scientists couldn't find an explanation, as the stone hadn't been melted, only changed color. Today, the valley is closed to the public, and access is limited. But at night, especially in summer, you can see lights flickering in the distance above the ground, like the breathing of the sleeping earth. Scientists call them plasma discharges, and locals still believe they are the heart of an ancient fire, still beating beneath the stone. The firestones of La Mancha remind us that Spain holds not only the traces of empires, but also the memory of powers older than history. Here, light and darkness intertwine, creating a flame that does not consume, but preserves mystery. And perhaps it is in these quiet hills, beneath the heat of the eternal sun, that lies the answer to the question of how man first discovered that the earth is alive and capable of self-luminescence. Goya's missing paintings. The story of Francisco Goya has long been emblematic of the Spanish genius, an artist who rose from court painter to witness to human darkness. His canvases capture the pain, fear, and rebellion hidden beneath the surface of Spanish society in the 18th and early 19th centuries. But in the shadow of his fame lives a story that few speak of. Several of the master's paintings, mentioned in letters, diaries, and memoirs of his contemporaries, have never been found. They seem to have vanished from time, leaving only hints, as if the artist himself hid them from the world, waiting for the time when they could be understood. The first mentions of the missing paintings date back to the period between 1803 and 1806, when Goya was living in a house on the outskirts of Madrid. He was already deaf, tired of war, intrigue, and the constant suspicions of the Inquisition. In one of his letters to his friend Miguel de Azara, he wrote, "My brush sees what the eyes do not." These words were long considered a metaphor until a list of works was discovered in the archives of the Royal Academy of San Fernando, including Night Faces, Children of Silence, and Feast in the Shadows. None of these paintings survive today. Researchers believe Goya worked on them at the same time he created the famous black paintings, the somber images that covered the walls of his home, known as Quinta del Sordo. After the artist's death, the house was sold, and some of the frescoes were removed, but others disappeared without a trace. It is speculated that these included the aforementioned Night Faces and Feast in the Shadows. However, descriptions of the paintings do not match any of the artist's known compositions. In the diary of Goya's contemporary, the poet José de Laverda, he wrote, "He showed me works that no one should see in daylight. They whisper." Scholars debate what exactly the poet meant. Some believe he was referring to scenes of violence painted with such expressiveness that the artist feared accusations of madness. Others see in these words a hint of something else, paintings that seem to have a presence of their own. When the systematic collection of Goya's works began in the mid-19th century, part of the collection ended up in private hands. Several paintings were sold abroad, and many later surfaced in European museums, but none of the missing titles appeared in catalogs or at auctions. There is evidence that in 1849, a French collector acquired an unsigned painting depicting people with veiled faces standing around a light source. The painting disappeared in a fire in Lyon, and nothing has been heard of it since. A 20th century discovery generated particular interest. An old wooden panel containing a fragment of an image executed in a technique characteristic of Goya was discovered in a private collection in Zaragoza. It depicted a child's hand holding a candle with a shadow cast on the wall. X-rays revealed another image beneath the paint, an eyeless face painted directly over the background. When experts compared the brushstrokes with authentic works by the artist, the resemblance was almost perfect. However, the painting ended in a fragment, as if part of a larger canvas. Researchers suggested that it might have belonged to the Children of Silence series. Psychologists and art historians have long noted that Goya perceived painting as an act of revelation, not just art. He painted not what he saw, but what he felt. In his final years, his works became almost visionary, a world where the human became illusory. Some experts believe the missing paintings were too personal, perhaps painted during illness or visions, and his family simply destroyed them after his death. However, there is no evidence to support this destruction. In the 21st century, archivists at the Royal Academy discovered a curious detail. Goya's correspondence with his student Eugenio Lux mentions a black cycle consisting of 12 paintings. Only 10 are known. The remaining 2 are not listed in any inventories or correspondence. In one letter, the artist wrote, "2 will remain with me. They are not for human eyes." Perhaps these are the paintings that disappeared, or perhaps he hid them himself, leaving them where no one would find them. Local legends add their own shadow. It's said that the night before his death, the artist ordered the shutters closed and ordered no one to enter his studio. Servants claimed to hear rustling sounds and quiet laughter, as if someone was speaking to him. When they entered the morning, the artist was unconscious and 2 canvas-wrapped frames lay on the floor. After Goya's death, they were taken away with his belongings, and the trail was lost. Several years later, an abandoned box containing the remains of the canvases was found on the road from Bordeaux to Zaragoza, but they were so damaged that the image was impossible to discern. Some researchers believe the paintings may have been deliberately hidden. At the time, the church strictly monitored any manifestations of blasphemous art, and Goya was already under suspicion for his etchings. He may have buried the paintings somewhere in the garden or hidden them within the walls of his house to avoid danger. The house was later demolished, and if the paintings were indeed left inside, they may have been lost forever beneath layers of earth. And yet, every few decades, someone comes forward claiming to have seen one of the missing paintings. Some speak of a canvas depicting faceless figures, others of a scene in which people dance around an invisible light. All descriptions share one thing, a sense of presence, as if the viewer's gaze becomes part of the painting. Such was Goya's style, not to observe, but to compel one to look within. Today, the Prado Museum holds a copy of the letter in which the artist wrote, "My paintings do not disappear, they wait." These words sound like a prophecy. Perhaps the missing canvases truly are waiting somewhere, in an old house, in a forgotten chapel, or perhaps in the depths of the Spanish earth, where darkness and light merge into an eternal palette. And if one day they are found, the world will once again see what Goya was trying to show. Not people, but the very shadow of the human soul, reflected in paint that never ages because it is painted with fear and truth. Moorish Library of Granada. In the south of Spain, where the Sierra Nevada mountains descend to valleys scented with the scent of oranges, stands a city whose stone holds the breath of the East. Granada is the last stronghold of Moorish culture, a place where the wisdom of Islamic scholars and the secrets of Andalusian mystics once merged. Among all the stories associated with this city, one stands out as a special shadow, the legend of a library that vanished the night the Christians captured the Alhambra. It is said that its walls held books capable of changing our understanding of the world, but after the fall of Granada in the late 15th century, not a single scroll, not a single page, remained. According to the chronicler Hernando de Bassa, the library was located near the Nasrid Palace and belonged to Emir Abu Abdullah al-Ahmar, the last Muslim ruler of Andalusia. Its walls were decorated with mosaics, stars shone on the ceiling, and cedar shelves lined the halls, holding scrolls brought from Cordoba, Damascus, and Cairo. It housed the works of philosophers, alchemists, physicians, and astronomers, more than 20,000 manuscripts. When Christian troops entered the city, the library stood untouched, but within days it had disappeared. The first theory among historians was that the library had simply been burned. It's well known that the Inquisition waged a campaign to destroy Muslim texts. But the odd thing is that the reports of the fires in Granada at that time contain no mention of such a huge number of books burning. There are no smoke trails, no descriptions of fires. Moreover, many eyewitnesses claimed that the building housing the library was never destroyed. It simply stood empty. The first legends emerged in the 16th century. Locals recounted that a few days before the city's fall, a column of camels, accompanied by men in dark cloaks, approached the walls at night. They entered the library and never emerged. The next morning, the building was empty. From then on, rumors persisted that the books had been secretly removed and hidden somewhere in the mountains to protect them from the Inquisition. Several centuries later, mention of chests sent to the east was indeed found in the monastery archives, but their contents were not specified. Archaeologists working in the Alhambra area repeatedly found fragments of charred pages with Arabic script. Analysis showed that the paper and ink were from that period, but the text contents could not be determined. Some scholars believe the library may have been divided, The religious books were destroyed, while the scholarly works were transported to secret collections, perhaps even to North Africa. However, no records of the acquisition of such a significant collection have been found in any Maghreb archives. Historians have been particularly interested in the mention of the Book of Lights, a manuscript supposedly kept in the library. One ancient catalog describes it as a work combining astronomy, geometry, and mysticism. It argued that the stars are not mere bodies, but reflections of events occurring on Earth. According to legend, the Book of Lights could predict earthquakes and wars by calculating the positions of the planets and the rhythms of time. If such a manuscript truly existed, it could have been destroyed as heresy. However, no surviving document from the time mentions its seizure. In the 17th century, the monk Diego Sanz de Montalban, studying the Alhambra archives, claimed to have found an old door in the dungeons leading to a walled-up hall. When he tried to open it, he heard a strange sound from within, like the rustling of pages. Frightened, the monk ordered the passage sealed again. His notes were long considered a fabrication, until, in the 20th century, archaeologists clearing the palace's cellars discovered an underground corridor leading to an unknown chamber. The entrance was blocked by rubble, but instruments revealed a cavity behind the wall. What lies within remains unknown. Some researchers believe the library was not simply a repository of knowledge, but a kind of university. According to Arabic sources, it housed scholars who mastered not only the sciences, but also the art of memory, a special technique that allowed one to memorize vast amounts of information. Perhaps some of this knowledge was the source of the fear of the library. After all, if a person is able to retain something forbidden, then they themselves become a living book. In the 20th century, during the restoration of one of the Alhambra's halls, workers discovered a ceramic vessel in the wall containing a fragment of parchment. It bore lines reminiscent of a map, showing Granada connected by straight lines to other cities: Toledo, Cordoba, Seville, and Cairo. Perhaps this was a route along which books were exported, or perhaps a symbolic representation of the path of knowledge from west to east. Modern researchers are attempting to reconstruct the lost texts from quotes preserved in the works of other authors. They believe the Granada Library contained not only philosophical and scientific works, but also works on the origin of light, the nature of the soul, and the mysteries of numbers. This knowledge was too dangerous for the age of dogma. Therefore, perhaps they were not destroyed, but hidden, as the Dead Sea Scrolls were once hidden, awaiting the time when people would again learn to read without fear. Today, there's a place in Granada where old people tell children in the evenings that a library sleeps beneath the city. When a south wind blows, the air fills with the scent of parchment and oil, and a faint rustling sound, like the turning of pages, can be heard from underground. Perhaps it's just a figment of my imagination. Or perhaps the city's memory truly lives on, waiting for those who can hear its voice. Granada's Moorish library remains one of Spain's most beautiful mysteries. It reminds us that knowledge can vanish from our hands, but not from space. And as the sun sets on the domes of the Alhambra, its light reflects off the mosaics, just as it once did off the polished pages of lost books, wherein was written what people feared to understand too soon. The legend of Isabella of Castile's mirror. Among the countless relics of the Spanish crown, there is one that museums and official catalogs prefer not to mention. It is a mirror that belonged to Queen Isabella of Castile, a woman whose will determined the fate of an entire kingdom, uniting the peninsula and sending Columbus's caravels into uncharted seas. Legend has it that in the final years of her life, Isabella possessed a mirror that reflected not faces, but souls, and that with its help, she made decisions that determined the fates of thousands. The mirror's history begins in the late 15th century. According to ancient court records, in 1492, an Arab craftsman arrived at court, having migrated from Granada after the fall of the emirate. He brought with him an object of dark polished glass, set in silver, and decorated with ligatures in which phrases in Arabic and Hebrew could be discerned. The craftsman claimed that the mirror had been created in Cordoba many centuries earlier, and that truth could be discerned in its reflection if one looked at it by candlelight and did not blink. At first, the mirror was kept in the treasury, but after Ferdinand's death, the queen fell into a deep melancholy. According to those close to her, she often locked herself in a room alone, lit only a single candle, and gazed into the mirror for long periods. Servants claimed that after such sessions, the queen became strangely calm, as if receiving an answer to an inner question. It was during this period that Isabella signed a series of decrees that changed the course of Spanish history: the expulsion of the Jews, the reorganization of church courts, and support for naval expeditions. Later, contemporaries would say that all these decisions were inspired not by prayer, but by something she saw in the mirror. The first mentions of the artifact's strange properties date back to the chronicles of the monk Francisco de Salcedo, who served as the court confessor. He wrote that the mirror does not reflect light, but emits it from within. In one of his letters, he warned the queen that this thing may be a window not to the heavens, but to what lies beneath the earth. After this, Salcedo abruptly left court, and all traces of him are lost in the Inquisition's archives. In the early 16th century, after Isabella's death, the mirror disappeared from her chambers. It was not listed in the inventory of her possessions, although all her other valuables had been meticulously listed. Only several decades later, during the reign of Philip II, was an object described as a dark mirror in a silver frame with unclear markings, discovered in the monastery's vault at El Escorial. It was brought to the monastery along with other relics, but no monk dared keep it in their cell. It was said that the mirror dimmed when a candle was brought near, and shadows appeared on its surface, moving independently of the light source. The monastery archives contain a record of a night when the mirror seemed to come to life. A monk on duty in the vault heard a faint ringing sound and saw the image of a woman's face appear on the glass. He described it as simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. When he approached, the glass cracked but did not shatter, and a chill blew out of the crack as if a window had opened onto winter. After this incident, the mirror was placed in a lead-lined box and sealed with the seal of the Inquisition. Over the following centuries, information about the mirror emerges only fragmentarily. In the 18th century, a French ambassador to the Bourbon court mentioned seeing a strange object in the monastery treasury, covered with a cloth beneath which the air trembled as if from heat. In the 19th century, during the Napoleonic Wars, the monastery was plundered, and the mirror has since been considered lost. However, in the 20th century, several researchers claim to have seen an object similar to it in private collections in Madrid and Seville. Scientists who studied the description believe the mirror may have been made of obsidian, a volcanic glass used by the ancient Mayans and Egyptians for ritual purposes. Such mirrors do indeed create a deep, almost lifelike reflection, but the legends surrounding it go beyond physics. Popular belief holds that Isabella's mirror was cursed because the queen used it not for contemplation, but for divination. One story claims that she once saw her own death in it, a standing body and an empty throne behind her. Some historians claim that it was after this vision that Isabella ordered some of her property to be distributed to monasteries and stopped attending receptions. Her diaries from her final years are full of short sentences, as if written in haste. One of them reads, "The mirror knows who looks and does not forget." These words became the last line in a book found among her personal belongings. Today, several ancient mirrors of unknown provenance are stored in the cellars of old monasteries in Granada and Toledo. One of them, briefly displayed in a museum, truly evokes a strange sensation. The reflection seems delayed, as if lingering for a moment. Scholars attribute this to the unevenness of the surface, but visitors claim to have seen figures in the reflection that weren't there. After several such incidents, the mirror was removed from display, and its current whereabouts are unknown. The legend of Isabella's mirror has endured through the ages not because it possessed miraculous powers, but because it reminded people that power and knowledge are reflections of the same light. When a person gazes into a mirror too long, they see not the truth, but themselves dissolving in it. And perhaps this is why the Queen, who managed to unite Spain and open the way to the New World, at the end of her life saw not glory, but the darkness from which emanated the cold gleam of her mirror. Today, Isabella's crown, letters, portraits, and sword can be seen in Spanish museums, but the mirror itself is missing. Perhaps it rests in one of the monastery's vaults, or, as the old monks say, its surface has been consumed by time. Or perhaps the mirror simply awaits a new gaze, one who dares once again to see in it not the reflection of a face, but the fate of an entire people, cast in black glass, where light and darkness merge forever. The secret brotherhood of alchemists of Seville. In the old quarter of Seville, where streets wind between whitewashed houses and the scent of orange trees mingles with the dampness of ancient stone, the legend of a brotherhood that sought to transform not metal into gold, but the human spirit into light, still lives on. Chronicles refer to them by various names: the Alchemists of Seville, the Society of Light, the Brothers of Fire. But all sources agree on one thing: they existed, and their traces are lost in the city's underground vaults, where the Guadalquivir River reflects the flames of the sunsets, as if reminding us that an invisible fire burns beneath the water. The first mentions of the Brotherhood date back to the early 16th century, when Seville was one of the richest cities in Europe. Caravels returned from the New World, markets buzzed with gold, and behind the palace facades lurked laboratories filled with bubbling retorts. Alchemy was then considered a science bordering on belief and taboo. Officially condemned, many nobles secretly financed the search for the philosopher's stone, which could prolong life and grant insight. Among them is Don Mateo de Alarcón, a scholar and patron of musicians and philosophers. Legend has it that it was in his house on Calle Abades that the alchemists of Seville gathered. The Inquisition archives preserved several records of interrogations related to this circle. One document speaks of men wearing rings with the symbol of the sun and the serpent. These symbols were found on the walls of basements and even on the doors of old churches. Investigators suspected the Brotherhood of engaging in heretical rituals, but found no evidence. Their members were never arrested. All disappeared overnight, leaving behind only traces of soot and the smell of sulfur. From then on, de Alarcón's house stood empty until a century later, when it was converted into a workshop. When builders opened the basement, they discovered an underground chamber, the walls of which were covered with images of circles and spirals. In the center stood a stone table, surrounded by the remains of metal vessels, resembling laboratory equipment. One of the vessels bore the inscription, Lux intra tenebras, light within darkness. Scholars later found this phrase in other places in Seville, engraved on stones hidden beneath the pavement. Legends say that the alchemists of Seville were attempting to create not gold, but a special substance they called the living metal. They believed it would reflect light in such a way that one could see not one's own face, but rather one's inner essence. Some historians believe this was an early attempt to create a mirror-like alloy based on mercury and silver. However, ancient texts describe the result differently: a substance in which light breathes. Of particular interest is a manuscript discovered in the early 20th century in the library of the University of Seville. Its pages are covered with symbols of the sun, moon, and a tree whose roots reach into the sky. At the bottom is the signature Ordo Solaris Hispanica. Many scholars believe this is the Latin name of the Brotherhood. The text mentions a silver vessel holding the breath of fire. Perhaps alchemists were indeed attempting to capture light in material form. When 20th century scholars began studying the history of Seville's alchemists, a strange pattern caught their attention. All the houses associated with their names were located along a single line, aligned with the direction of the setting sun on the summer solstice. This gave rise to the hypothesis that the city's layout was changed under the influence of the Brotherhood, and their symbolism was hidden in the architecture, on portals, stained glass windows, and even on old wells. But what happened to them? Why did the Brotherhood vanish suddenly, leaving no trace? There's a theory that the alchemists performed a ritual aimed at transferring the light within man. Contemporaries claimed that on the night of their disappearance, a strange aurora borealis, similar to the northern lights, hung over Seville, though such a phenomenon is impossible at these latitudes. A white cloud hung in the sky for a long time the next morning, not dissipating even in the sun. In the 19th century, archaeologists discovered a crypt beneath the old church of San Esteban, where a stone disc depicting the sun, surrounded by 12 symbols, was preserved on the floor. In the center of the disc was a hole through which, on a certain day of the year, a beam of light fell, illuminating a niche in the wall. Inside, they found the remains of a glass vessel containing tiny particles of a grayish-silver substance. Chemical analysis revealed nothing unusual, but when exposed to light, the particles began to shimmer slightly. This discovery was dubbed the breath of Seville. Modern historians cautiously hypothesize that alchemists may have discovered the phenomenon of luminescence long before its official scientific discovery. But local residents still believe their knowledge was spiritual. According to elders, on warm nights, you can hear the hum of pipes underground, the spirits of the alchemists singing a hymn to the sun, which they attempted to capture within matter. Seville carefully guards its secrets. Tourists stroll the streets, unaware that beneath their feet stretches a network of ancient cellars and tunnels leading to the river. It is said that in one of them stands a black metal door, impervious to time. Engraved on it is a simple word: Luz. No one knows who installed it or what lies beyond, but local monks claim that every time the city plunges into darkness, a faint glow emanates from within, reminiscent of the breath of an ancient fire. Thus, the secret brotherhood of Seville's alchemists became part of legend, the boundary between science and faith, the desire for light and the fear of it. Their traces faded into stone, but their dream, to transform darkness into knowledge, remained in the very heart of the city, where sunsets paint the walls gold, as if reminding us, sometimes gold is simply light that manages to remain. Treasure of Nerva. In the remote lands of Andalusia, where silvery rivers lazily meander between hills and reddish clay glistens in the sun, a story has been told for centuries of a treasure that supposedly belongs to no man. It is called the Treasure of Nerva, named after the ancient city that existed here during the Roman Empire. Today, all that remains of that city are dust-covered ruins and a few wind-eaten walls. But beneath these stones, according to locals, lies gold that has not lost its luster, gold that does not warm the hands but seems to chill the soul. The legend begins in the 1st century AD, when the Romans discovered rich copper and silver deposits in these areas. According to the historian Pliny, Nerva mined metal used for minting coins and imperial jewelry. But one day, miners stumbled upon a cave whose walls shone like a polished bronze dome. Incomprehensible symbols were carved into the stones, circles connected by lines resembling sunbeams. In the center of the cave stood a sarcophagus of black stone, and inside, according to ancient chroniclers, lay a vessel filled with gold dust. Emperor Nerva, hearing of the discovery, ordered his scientists dispatched there. They examined the vessel and concluded that the dust was unlike metal. It did not melt when heated, did not tarnish, and did not lose weight. It was then dubbed aurum vivum, living gold. It is said that Nerva ordered the vessel sealed and hidden in underground vaults, fearing that the substance possessed some unknown power. Almost 2,000 years have passed since then, but no trace of this artifact has ever been found. Archaeologists who began research in the Nerva area in the 19th century discovered old shafts leading deep underground. Among the collapsed tunnels, they found slabs with Roman inscriptions warning against entry. One of them was carved with a symbol of a snake biting its tail and the words, "Non redeas," do not return. Beyond the slab was a corridor leading to a round chamber containing traces of ancient torches and pieces of metal melted to the consistency of glass. Scientists believed the site to be a methane explosion, but they were unable to detect any odor or traces of coal. In the early 20th century, geologist Rafael Mendoza described a phenomenon. In one of the mines, abandoned since Roman times, the ground emitted a faint glow. Stones brought to the surface lost this light after a while. Research revealed that they contained an unusual combination of minerals, including rare arsenopyrite and traces of an unknown substance resembling microscopic gold fibers. Mendoza hypothesized that this was a natural compound capable of holding an electric charge, but its origin remained a mystery. According to legend, Nerva's treasure wasn't intended for wealth. It was considered a gift from the gods of the underworld, who guarded the balance between light and darkness. Anyone who tried to bring the gold to the surface died. One ancient chronicle tells of a Roman centurion who ordered the vessel retrieved from the cave. The next morning, his entire squad was found dead, their faces covered in a silvery coating, their eyes open, as if they had seen something too much to bear. In the 19th century, a group of treasure hunters attempted to retrace the steps of the ancient miners. They found an old entrance and descended into the tunnels. 3 days later, only one returned, blinded. He raved, insisting that the stones glow when you close your eyes. His story was recorded by a local priest, and it contains a detail that researchers still debate. He claimed to have seen a human shadow made of light. Scientists attribute this to gas poisoning, but the legend lives on. In the 20th century, while drilling new mines, workers discovered a metal sarcophagus covered in reliefs. When they tried to open it, the metal began to crumble, as if unable to withstand the air. Inside, they found only dust, glowing under lamps. But when they tried to collect it, it disappeared, as if it had dissolved. Modern physicists who have studied the reports of these discoveries speculate that these may be phosphorescent minerals, but no analysis has confirmed their presence. Even photographs taken in the mines fade over time, as if the light emanating from the depths refuses to be captured. Some locals claim that at night a barely noticeable glow, like a breath, rises from the ground. This is believed to be Nerva's gold, which continues to live underground, feeding on the warmth of the world. Elders say that sometimes it chooses a master, one who seeks not wealth, but knowledge. Such people are rarely seen twice. At the beginning of the 21st century, a team of archaeologists from the University of Seville installed sensors in old mines to record anomalies. A week later, the equipment stopped working. When the researchers returned, they found the cables melted and the metal objects coated with a strange deposit resembling gold dust. Analysis revealed that this was not metal, but a compound of unknown organic elements. Its structure resembled living tissue, giving rise to a new hypothesis. Perhaps the so-called Nerva treasure was not a substance, but a form of life existing underground. This theory sounds crazy, but it has its own logic. After all, even ancient texts call gold not a metal, but the breath of the earth. Perhaps the Romans encountered a natural phenomenon beyond human comprehension, and therefore decided to conceal it, creating a mystery around it that has endured for centuries. Today, the Nerva mines are abandoned, their entrances sealed with grates. But local children sometimes throw stones into them and swear they hear a heartbeat-like hum in response. On moonlit nights, if you look at the ground at the right angle, you can see the dust glitter, as if a clear river were slowly flowing beneath the soil. Perhaps it's just a reflection of the stars, or perhaps, somewhere deep below, a treasure still breathes, a treasure that knows no weariness and belongs to no age. And so, as before, the city of Nerva sleeps over its secret, not daring to awaken what once brought it wealth and fear. For, as the old saying goes, gold may warm the hands, but light never does. And he who seeks living gold must be prepared to pay a price that cannot be measured by scales, coins, or time. Unidentified mosaics near Córdoba. Beneath ancient Córdoba, where stone bridges are reflected in the slow flow of the Guadalquivir River, beneath dusty streets and orange orchards lies something the city prefers to keep quiet about. In the mid-20th century, archaeologists conducting routine work in the old quarter of San Basilio stumbled upon a cavity from which emanated a strange smell of damp stone. When the workers cleared the debris, a staircase descending downwards revealed itself. At the bottom, a hall began, the walls covered in mosaics, but not the kind familiar from Roman baths or palaces, but a different kind, cold, as if created not for decoration, but for observation. This discovery stunned Spanish scholars. At first glance, everything resembled a Roman structure, but upon closer inspection, it became clear that the designs did not correspond to any known school. The mosaic consisted of tiny tiles of different colors, laid with such precision that there was no visible seam between them. They depicted not hunting scenes or ornaments, but stars, planets, and lines connecting them into complex geometric patterns. The central composition was a circle divided into 12 sectors, but without the signs of the zodiac. Instead of familiar symbols, the tiles were inscribed with incomprehensible signs, reminiscent of a combination of Arabic and Latin scripts, but belonging to neither. Scientists assumed that they were looking at a star map. However, comparison with known astronomical charts revealed that the constellation arrangements did not correspond to either the northern or southern hemispheres. The stars in the mosaic formed figures not found on the celestial sphere, and their relative positions made it appear as if the observer were looking not up at the sky, but down from it, toward the earth. When they began measuring the hall, it was discovered that its shape perfectly fit the golden ratio. Niches were discovered on the walls, likely containing bronze vessels. There were no traces of human remains or household items, but the air inside was surprisingly fresh, despite the confined space. It seemed as if the dungeon was breathing. Archaeologists' reports documented a strange phenomenon. Compass instruments and magnetometers began to behave abnormally, with the needle spinning around its axis. One of the researchers lost consciousness after standing for a long time in the center of the mosaic, and later reported seeing a rotating circle of light before his eyes. This sparked widespread speculation about a possible underground electromagnetic source, but no traces of metal or conductive rock were found. According to archaeological evidence, the mosaic dates to approximately late antiquity, but it contains elements that are not typical of either Roman or Byzantine styles. The color scheme is also unusual. Shades of blue and black predominate, with thin stripes of gold between them, creating a sense of movement. Under the torch's light, the image seems to come alive. The stars begin to twinkle and the lines shimmer. At the end of the 20th century, archaeologists attempted a more thorough excavation. Beneath the main hall, they discovered a narrow passage leading to a smaller chamber. There, on the floor, lay a slab decorated with the same symbols as the mosaic. When the slab was lifted, a layer of ash and thin, charred fragments of parchment were revealed. Experts in ancient languages determined that the letters belonged to an unknown script, but some of them resembled symbols found in ancient Arabic treatises on the stars. There's a theory that the mosaic was created during the time when Córdoba was the greatest scientific center in Muslim Spain. It may have served as a laboratory for observing the heavens and attempting to combine astronomy and philosophy. However, the structure of the halls points to a different purpose, a religious one. A hole in the ceiling through which daylight penetrated illuminated the central circle only once a year, on the vernal equinox. Then, a ray of sunlight would strike the center of the mosaic and remain motionless for several minutes, as if the stone were catching the light and holding it. Some researchers saw in this the symbolism of a portal, a point connecting heaven and earth. One report, dated 1976, stated, "In the light of the midday sun, the image loses its volume, but in the moonlight, it appears alive. The hall seems to react to the phases of the sky." After this, excavations were suspended, citing ground instability. But local residents are convinced there's a different reason. Since the hall's discovery, strange things have been happening in the area. Water has disappeared from wells, and dark spots resembling star constellations have appeared on the walls of neighboring houses. Some claim to hear a low chorus-like hum emanating from underground at night. When city authorities decided to seal the entrance, workers refused to descend, claiming a cold light was emanating from the depths. Today, access to the mosaics is restricted. Their existence has been officially confirmed, but the details are classified. Photographs taken in the room are strangely flawed. Light streaks appear across the image, as if the mosaic itself is refusing to be photographed. Several researchers who worked there described feeling as if they were being watched. One said, "I stood before the map of the sky, but felt as if someone was looking at me from within the mosaic." Today, few dare to speak of these halls. For archaeologists, they are unique evidence of a synthesis of cultures. For mystics, proof of ancient knowledge lost to humanity. Perhaps this was a temple of stellar cycles, a laboratory of sound and light, or a place where they attempted to record the movements of the sky in stone. Or perhaps it's simpler. Someone, some time ago, wanted to leave an imprint on the earth of a gaze directed toward infinity. And so, the mosaics beneath Córdoba don't depict the sky, but are themselves part of it. A stone reflection of the cosmos, where each fragment holds not color, but time. Someday, if the earth reopens these halls, perhaps the light that fell there thousands of years ago will still await someone who can understand it. The Curse of the Silver Mine in Almeria. In the southeast of Spain, in the arid hills of Almeria, where day and night are separated only by a sharp sea wind, stands an abandoned village known as Las Minas de San Ramón. Life once teemed here, the clanking of pickaxes, the rattling of mine carts, and the shipment of silver from the local mines to Madrid and overseas. But today, these slopes are silent, and only the occasional tourist wanders among the ruins of houses covered in a layer of reddish dust. People abandoned this place over a century ago, after what locals called a curse fell upon the mine. The first mines appeared here as early as the Roman era. Metal mining is known to have occurred in Almeria during the Arab era, but the real boom began in the 19th century, when industrialists discovered silver ore deposits at a depth of several hundred meters. At that time, Spain was experiencing a new economic boom, and engineers, scientists, and prospectors flocked from Europe. It seemed as if untold wealth lay beneath these mountains. However, along with these initial successes, strange events began to unfold. Workers complained of strange sounds coming from the depths. Sometimes it was a quiet hum, like breathing, and sometimes distant thuds, as if someone were hammering a rock from within. Several miners claimed to have heard screams, although no one died during those shifts. It was then decided that resonant waves or underground voids were to blame, but alarm grew, and one day in 1868, the first accident occurred. At a depth of over 300 meters, an entire gallery collapsed. 15 people died, but not all of their bodies were recovered. When rescuers reached the rubble months later, they discovered that part of the walls were covered in a strange silvery coating, and figures resembling human silhouettes were visible in the rock. The surface glistened like metal, as if the stone had absorbed those trapped within. After this, the disaster was considered a sign from above, and mining was suspended for several years. However, a decade later, work resumed. The new owners brought in engineers from France who promised to reinforce the shafts with modern methods. All was going well until during one shift, a team of 7 people disappeared underground. The tunnel they descended into was empty. No cave-in, no signs of a struggle. Only traces of soot and charcoal drawings were found on the walls. A circle with a cross through it, and beneath it, the inscription in Spanish, "The earth breathes." This phrase was later found several times in other places in the mine. After the second tragedy, local priests performed a blessing ceremony, but the peace was short-lived. People began to leave. It was said that at night, a light like a torch's flame would appear above the mine entrance, and that during those hours, the air would fill with the smell of sulfur. Several workers claimed to have seen figures in miners' helmets standing motionless at the entrance, but as they approached, they would vanish. At the beginning of the 20th century, a scientist from Granada, Dr. Enrique Linares, decided to study the area's magnetic field. His instruments detected strong fluctuations, as if electrical discharges were occurring underground. He hypothesized that silver ore interacted with underground gas sources, causing the glow and noise. To test his theory, he descended into the mine with 2 assistants. Only one returned. He reported that at depth, they were surrounded by a strange glow, reminiscent of liquid silver, and the air became thick as fog. When the light from the lantern came back on, the doctor had already disappeared. The search party found neither his body nor any trace of his equipment. After this, the mine was permanently closed. Authorities ordered the entrances sealed, but even decades later, local residents avoid the area. On hot days, the ground there seems to emit a faint glow. Scientists who examined the soil did indeed find microscopic silver particles in the rock, capable of reflecting light even at night, but the source of the glow remains unknown. At depth, the temperature is too low for a chemical reaction to occur. There's a belief that the spirit of the metal still haunts the mine. Elders say the silver extracted from these places is cursed. Anyone who owned jewelry made from it lost everything they had. The Almeria archives contain records of several families who grew rich from the ore and soon went bankrupt. One day at a museum where a silver cup from the mine was deposited, the glass case spontaneously shattered. The object has since been put away in storage. In 2002, a team of cavers from Murcia attempted to penetrate the old tunnel. They managed to get about 200 meters before a rockfall blocked their way. One of the participants reported that when he turned off his flashlight, the surrounding walls glowed faintly and breathing could be heard in the darkness as if someone was standing nearby. The descent was aborted, and the equipment brought out was found to be coated with a silver coating. Chemical analysis revealed it to be pure metal without any impurities. Some researchers see this as a natural miracle, perhaps a reaction between water and ore underground, creating the glow. But others are convinced it's something more. Ancient Roman tablets found nearby are engraved with the words Argentum Vivit, living silver. According to legend, the ancients considered this metal a living being, capable of movement and breathing. Perhaps this is precisely what the miners of Almeria encountered, not a curse, but an ancient power locked within the earth's depths. Today, the mine's remains are only reminders of its past, with holes covered with grates. In the evenings, the wind whistles through the tunnels, and it seems as if someone is quietly singing. Tourists photograph the entrance and then notice white spots appearing in their pictures, resembling metallic reflections. Locals call them the breath of silver. They say that if you listen closely, you can hear the sound of pickaxes, not from the past, but from the depths, where the earth still breathes and holds its secret. And while the dusty winds of Almeria carry the scent of salt and sulfur, the old men repeat the same thing. Don't disturb the silver unless you want to hear it speak. After all, perhaps it wasn't people who cursed the mine, but the mine itself. The greed of a man who once set out to extract light from darkness and was unable to bring it back. The disappearance of the monastery bell in Burgos. In northern Spain, where the Arlanzón River slowly skirts the old city of Burgos, rise the ruins of the monastery of San Pedro de Cardeña. Its walls have survived wars, fires, and earthquakes, but one story remains unexplained for centuries. It concerns a bell that rang by itself and then vanished, leaving behind only a hum in the air. No metal, no debris, no trace. Only the memory of a sound, seemingly forever etched in stone. The first mentions of the bell date back to the 11th century, when the monastery was just beginning to be built. Chronicles say it was cast from bronze salvaged from an old Arab temple. Silver and a small amount of an unknown mineral found in nearby caves were added to the alloy. According to legend, when the bell first rang, its voice was so clear it could be heard for several miles. The monks believed the sound possessed sacred powers and could purify the air of disease. For centuries, the bell called to prayer, warned of storms, and accompanied every important event in the city's life. But in the mid-17th century, residents began to notice strange things. Sometimes the bell would ring on its own, even though no one was pulling its rope. Its sound would appear in the middle of the night, filling the streets with anxiety. Then the abbot ordered the bell removed and inspected, but the craftsman found no damage. The metal was as clean as if freshly cast. After that, the ringing continued, and each night its pitch became lower, as if someone were drawing the note from deep within the earth. Legend has it that in 1679, during a severe thunderstorm, a flash of light enveloped the monastery. By morning, the bell was gone from the tower. Only the mountings, melted and blackened, protruded from the stone. The monks assumed it had been struck by lightning, but found no trace of molten metal. The ashes lying beneath the tower contained no trace of copper. It was as if the bell had simply dissolved. Rumors later surfaced that the bell was cursed. Some linked its disappearance to an ancient casting ritual. According to one theory, the blood of an unrepentant man was added to the bronze during its creation to revive the metal. It was believed that such a bell could ring without being touched, but over time, it would demand back what was given to it. The monastery's archives contain a record of a monk named Fernando de Esteves, who claimed to have heard a voice coming from the bell tower. He wrote, "When the bell rings, it calls not us, but the lost." A few months after this recording, Fernando disappeared. His cell was found open, and on the wall was a chalk circle in the words, "Vocem servavi," I have preserved my voice. In the 19th century, during a monastery restoration, workers clearing the dungeons discovered an empty chamber whose ceiling was covered with strange imprints. Each imprint was semicircular, as if someone had pressed a metal ring into it. When the diameter of the imprints was measured, it matched the size of the missing bell. In the center of the chamber, they found a stone slab engraved with the phrase, "Campana dormiens non tangenda." Do not touch a sleeping bell. In the 20th century, researchers attempted to explain the disappearance physically. Some suggested that the metal could have been destroyed by a plasma lightning discharge, vaporizing without a trace. However, calculations showed that the temperature must have been tens of times higher than possible. Others believed the bell had been stolen, but then it's unclear why no one saw any evidence of its removal. It weighed over half a ton, and could only have been lifted using complex mechanisms. There are eyewitness accounts of hearing the ringing even after its disappearance. In the 18th century, during the plague, residents of Burgos claimed to hear a low humming sound, like a distant bell, echoing over the monastery at night. It was impossible to record. The sound seemed to pass through the air, leaving no vibration. Even today, on windless evenings, tourists report hearing short peals, like the echo of old metal. In 1998, a team of researchers from the University of Salamanca installed sensitive microphones in the ruins to verify the phenomenon. After several nights, the devices detected sound waves vibrating at a frequency of 70 Hz, the exact frequency at which bells of this size ring. The recording repeated itself several times at precise intervals, as if someone were ringing according to an invisible schedule. However, no source of the vibrations was found. Some physicists have put forward a bold idea. Perhaps the bell wasn't just an object, but a resonator, created with unique proportions capable of interacting with the Earth's magnetic field. If it were struck by a lightning strike during a thunderstorm, the energy could have caused an effect in which the molecular structure of the metal changed, and the bell disappeared, not physically, but rather transitioned to a different state of matter, retaining its sound but losing its shape. For believers, it's simpler. They believe the bell, created in violation of sacred rules, has not withstood time and returned to where it came from, to oblivion. Therefore, when the evening bells begin to ring over Burgos, residents listen, trying to discern the one without a body, but with a voice. They say that hearing 3 short, echoless strokes is a reminder that even iron can remember, and that sound can outlive metal. Today, the monastery of San Pedro de Cardeña stands abandoned, and only rare pilgrims come there during thunderstorms. They claim that the air above the tower becomes thick, and a slight vibration is felt beneath their feet, as if the ground were responding to an invisible ringing. Scientists call this a coincidence, but the elders of the town say otherwise. The bell is still there. It has simply passed from the world of things into the world of sound. And as long as someone remembers its tone, it will ring, from time, from stone, from the void. Tomb Without a Body in Leon. On the outskirts of Old Leon, amid the grass-covered ruins of the monastery of San Miguel de Escalante, stands a stone chapel that even tourists avoid. It's unremarkable on the outside, a square building with a low vault and a half-erased cross on the pediment. But inside, under a layer of dust and moss, rests a sarcophagus that has become one of Spain's strangest mysteries. This tomb has been opened 3 times, and each time it has been found empty, although the inscriptions on the stone claim that it contains Don Hernando de Ribera, a knight who died in the 14th century and was canonized by the people for miracles performed after his death. The first records of the burial date back to 1383. The monastery's abbot at the time described a solemn funeral, the presence of royal envoys, and a wondrous fragrance emanating from the body. Chronicles report that the sarcophagus was sealed with wax and placed in a chapel where Mass was celebrated daily. For several decades, pilgrims came to venerate the Holy Knight, and many claimed to hear a soft ringing sound from within, as if someone were touching a sword. But just 100 years later, in the mid-15th century, Abbot Francisco de la Fuente ordered the tomb open to ensure the safety of the relics. In front of witnesses, the stone was lifted, revealing only a white cloak, a sword, and a parchment, with the phrase, "Non est hic corpus sed lumen." There is no body here, only light. The abbot wrote in his chronicle, "Neither bone nor dust remained, only air and radiance." After this, the sarcophagus was resealed. A second attempt to open the tomb took place in the 17th century during the Reformation, when the church was verifying the authenticity of the relics. A commission from Madrid arrived at the monastery and again found the sarcophagus empty. However, on the inside of the lid, they discovered a palm print as if left in soft stone. The imprint had distinct lines, and in the center of the palm, a sign was discernible, a cross intersected by a circle. Scholars of the time considered this a miracle and ordered that the sarcophagus not be disturbed. The third autopsy took place in the 19th century, when the monastery was partially destroyed by French troops. The sarcophagus again contained no remains. However, a small niche containing a charred scroll was found nearby, bearing the words, "When the body disappears, the faith remains." Since then, the tomb has been known as La Tumba Sin Cuerpo, the tomb without a body. 20th century archaeologists attempted to explain the mystery rationally. They suggested that the relics might have been secretly transferred during the religious wars, and that later legends were merely an attempt to justify their loss. But the archives contain no documented evidence of such a transfer. Moreover, chemical analysis of the stone revealed that the sarcophagus lid had not been opened mechanically. The joint between the slabs was so tight that no tool marks were found. There is a theory that the sarcophagus was originally symbolic. According to some sources, Don Hernando de Ribera belonged to an order associated with early Christian mystics who studied the disappearance of matter through light. They believed that a person who had achieved perfection could leave the body, transforming it into radiance. Legends of such a transformation are found in both Arabic and Jewish texts of the time. Perhaps the knight's story is an echo of these beliefs. Locals say a faint glow can be seen near the chapel at night. Sometimes the clanking of metal can be heard, as if a sword were touching stone. Elders believe the knight's spirit did not die, but became part of the light that lingers in this place. A shepherd who lived nearby claimed to have seen the figure of a man in a white cloak standing in the fog at the entrance. As he approached, the figure dissolved, leaving behind the scent of incense. In the 21st century, a team of researchers from the University of Leon conducted a CT scan of the sarcophagus. The results were astonishing. Residual radiation, a weak electromagnetic field reminiscent of those detected near ancient megaliths, was detected inside. It was not associated with any minerals or metal objects. scientists hypothesized that the stone may have accumulated a charge due to the natural polarization of the rock. However, those present during the study report that while the instruments were operating, a short ringing sound, similar to a sword striking a stone, was suddenly heard in the chapel. There's an even stranger detail. Ancient engravings of the monastery depict a chapel with a window through which, on the summer solstice, a ray of sunlight falls directly onto the tomb. This effect persists to this day. At a certain moment of the day, a beam of light falls precisely on the sarcophagus lid, and the stone seems to become transparent. At that moment, a barely visible glow appears on it, and the air is filled with an indescribable aroma, a mixture of incense, metal, and something cold, reminiscent of rain. For the locals, this isn't a mystery, but a reminder. They say, "He didn't die. He went where the light is stronger than the body." And whenever clouds gather over Leon, the elderly cross themselves and look toward the monastery, for they believe the Knight de Ribera stands at the boundary between light and darkness, protecting the city from harm. Today, the tomb, without a body, remains under glass. Scholars, tourists, and pilgrims come there to see the emptiness that seems alive. Some see it as a symbol of faith, others as a vestige of ancient knowledge that vanished along with the night. But everyone who lingers before the sarcophagus longer than usual says the same thing. The silence here resonates. It vibrates like metal, as if someone is breathing beneath the stone. Thus Leon guards his secret, simple as light, yet heavy as stone. The tomb without a body reminds us that disappearance does not always mean death, and that perhaps the person who first understood this has simply become part of that radiance we call eternity. The tablets of Santiago de Compostela. In northern Spain, where the stone streets of Santiago de Compostela lead to its majestic cathedral, thousands of pilgrims have come to an end for centuries. Here, the air is filled with the ringing of bells, the scent of incense, and the footsteps of those who come seeking not a miracle, but an answer. But beneath this city lies a story rarely told in sermons and tours. The story of 6 stone slabs discovered in the late 19th century beneath the monastery of San Pelayo. These slabs were covered in inscriptions that no scholar could decipher. They were called the Tablets of Santiago, and since then, they have become one of Spain's most incomprehensible artifacts. It all began in the summer of 1884, when a group of workers were expanding the monastery's basement, preparing a room for an archive. One of the floor stones was unusually thin. When it was removed, a narrow passageway opened up, leading into an old crypt. Inside, under a thick layer of dust, lay 6 slabs, each about a meter long, carved from gray granite. On their surfaces were carved symbols resembling a combination of Latin, Greek, and ancient Phoenician characters. Some lines formed figures resembling maps or diagrams. Archaeologists called to the site assumed the find was late Roman. However, upon inspection, it turned out the symbols were carved with perfect depth, as if by a tool capable of penetrating the stone with laser precision. No known tool of that time could have left such smooth marks. Moreover, no signs of wear were found on the surface, as if the stone had never aged. Initial attempts to translate the inscriptions were unsuccessful. Some saw them as a combination of Latin litanies, others as fragments of star tables. Archaeology professor Miguel del Casar hypothesized that the slabs were part of an unknown mechanism, possibly an ancient calendar that linked the movements of the sun and moon. But when the slabs were exposed to light, something strange occurred. Faint lines that hadn't been there before appeared on each one, as if an image had been revealed in the stone by the rays of day. These lines formed spirals that intersected the central part of the slab, resembling whirlpools. From that moment on, unexplained phenomena began. Workers complained that it was becoming difficult to breathe in the basement, and a humming sound like an organ note could be heard in the darkness. Several people left the monastery, claiming to have seen light emanating from cracks in the floor at night. The abbot then ordered the slabs to be returned to the ground and the passage sealed, but rumors had already spread, and soon scholars from all over Europe arrived in Santiago. In 1892, a commission from the Royal Society of Archaeologists reopened the crypt. The slabs were found to be in place, but covered in a thin layer of moisture. When they were cleaned, scientists noticed that droplets of water were collecting along the carved lines, as if through invisible channels. When the stone was tilted, the liquid moved precisely along the ornamentation, forming patterns reminiscent of ancient wind maps. This was the first time the idea was raised that the tablets might not be written inscriptions, but rather a unique instrument, perhaps an acoustic or energy device capable of responding to the movement of air and water. In the early 20th century, researcher Francisco Ribeiro conducted experiments by placing lamps over the slabs to simulate sunlight. The heat caused patterns of light, resembling flashes, to appear on the surface. The scientist wrote that at this moment he felt a faint vibration, as if the stone were responding. After this experiment, Ribeiro fell ill, and his diaries disappeared from the archives. Later, the tablets were resealed. The church explained this as necessary to preserve the peace of the place. However, the legend lived on. Old monks said that every morning, when the cathedral's first bell began to ring, a light mist would rise from the ground near the monastery. And if you listened closely, you could hear a sound like someone whispering a prayer in a language no one knew. At the end of the 20th century, the tablets were revived. A team of archaeologists from the University of Compostela, having received permission, conducted a magnetic scan of the basement. The sensors detected strange pulsations, short waves occurring at precise intervals, coinciding with the rhythm of a bell ringing. The researchers claimed the stone responded to sound as if it contained a resonant mechanism. However, no official reports were published. The project was soon closed, and all materials were transferred to the church archives. Since then, no one has seen the slabs. It is believed that they were walled up again under the altar, and access to the crypt was permanently sealed. But from time to time, people appear in the city claiming to hear a dull rumble, like breathing, coming from underground. It is especially audible on the night of July 25th, St. James's Day, when thousands of pilgrims gather in the cathedral. Then, accompanied by the roar of the choir and the organ, the floor seems to tremble, and it seems as if the stones are whispering again somewhere beneath. Some believe the tablets were an ancient code, a message transmitted from a bygone era, perhaps from a civilization whose knowledge of sound and matter surpassed our own. Others are convinced it's simply a beautiful coincidence, a hoax born of the imagination. But in Santiago, they still say that a voice sleeps underground, capable of speaking when man learns to listen not with his ears, but with his heart. The city lives on, welcoming pilgrims whose footsteps echo daily in its stones. And if you stand at night near the walls of the monastery of San Pelayo, you can hear something below, slowly responding to each chime. Perhaps it's just the vibration of the old granite, or perhaps it's the tablets themselves, still singing their ancient words. Words no one can translate, for they were meant not for the eyes but for sound, for the silence itself, which has become the memory of stone. Laguna Negra Lake in the Lost Monks. High in the mountains of Zoria, where pine forests are reflected in the cold water, lies a lake whose name has long been a symbol of silence and fear. Laguna Negra, the Black Lake. Even during the day, its surface appears opaque, as if beneath it lies not a bottom, but a bottomless darkness. Legends about it are older than Castile itself. Local shepherds said the lake was bottomless and connected to the sea by underground passages. But among all the stories about it, one stands out for its particular poignancy. The story of a monastery that vanished along with its inhabitants in a single night, leaving no bodies or traces. The monastery of San Jerónimo de Laguna was founded in the 13th century on a small plateau above the water. Its tower served as a landmark for travelers, and the ringing of its bell carried across the mountains for miles. The monks lived a secluded life, transcribing books and observing the stars. Chronicles of the time mention that they kept a rare manuscript, the Code of the Winds, an ancient manuscript describing the cycles of time and the movement of the elements. No one knows where the brothers got it, but it was said to have come from the east and was written in a language no one understood. The monastery's last known abbot, Father Miguel de Valdez, was a scholar and alchemist. He believed the lake was not just a natural body of water, but a mirror reflecting celestial laws. He observed that on certain nights, the surface of the water would glow, and patterns resembling writing would appear on it. The monks recorded these in their books, believing them to be messages from God or signs of the approach of a new age. In the winter of 1492, a strange light illuminated the entire monastery. Shepherds living nearby said that a silver mist hung over the lake that night, and the air rang like metal. The next morning, when the storm died down, the monastery had disappeared. The stones where it had stood were smooth, as if polished by water, as if the building had dissolved. Not a single body, no remains of dishes, no books, nothing. Only a wooden cross and the pen the monks used to write their manuscripts were found at the water's edge. More than 5 centuries have passed since then, but the mystery of the disappearance remains unsolved. In the 16th century, investigators from the Inquisition came here, suspecting witchcraft. They found only a few fragments of manuscripts bearing symbols resembling star maps. One of the monks, who miraculously survived, claimed that the night before the storm, the brothers sang a psalm asking to unite with the breath of heaven. Afterward, a light rose from the lake, and they all stepped into it. Scientists exploring the lake in the 20th century found nothing but ordinary rocks and sediment, but instruments recorded an anomaly. The water below the surface was warmer than above, despite the absence of a heat source. Furthermore, at a depth of about 30 meters, the compass stopped working. One diver who descended there in 1982 reported seeing a stone arch underwater and carved symbols resembling monastic crosses. When he tried to approach, the water darkened, and he felt a strong pressure, as if someone was pushing him back. Folklore says the lake opens once every 100 years. Then, the monastery's reflection appears on its surface, and the monks' chanting can be heard rising from the depths. Several witnesses claim to have witnessed this phenomenon. In 1929, fishermen from a nearby village noticed a light in the water, like burning candles. As they approached, the apparition disappeared, but the scent of incense lingered over the water. Some historians believe the monastery actually existed, but was destroyed by a landslide, and the legend of its miraculous disappearance arose due to the impossibility of reaching the ruins. However, geologists refute this theory. There are no traces of a landslide in the rocks. Moreover, soil analysis revealed that the topsoil on which the building stood seemed to have melted, as if exposed to extreme temperatures. There's another, more mystical hypothesis. According to it, the monks were performing a ritual, seeking to unite sky and water, time and eternity. Perhaps they were attempting to replicate the ancient practices described in their Code of the Winds. According to this version, the light rising from the lake wasn't a flame, but a transition, a moment when the boundaries between worlds disappeared. The monastery wasn't destroyed then. It simply ceased to exist in our dimension, becoming part of the reflection we see in the water. Modern tourists rarely make it to Laguna Negra. Those who have visited at night say the lake exudes a strange tranquility, but as soon as they step closer to the water, everything around them becomes quieter, as if all sounds fade away. Some feel a slight dizziness, others a sense of unease, as if before a thunderstorm. And once, according to a local ranger, silhouettes in white hoods were visible above the water under a full moon. They stood motionless and then vanished, as if dissolving into the reflection. Today, Laguna Negra has been declared a nature reserve. Scientists continue to explore its depths, but admit that the phenomenon has no rational explanation. The water remains clear only near the shore, and further away, it turns into a pitch-black darkness where instruments stop working. At the bottom lies an unknown mineral layer that reflects light inward, not upward. Perhaps it is there, beneath the water, that the monastery of San Geronimo rests, frozen between time and eternity. Perhaps its bell still rings, not to the ears, but to the earth itself, a reminder that sometimes disappearance is not an end, but a transition. And when the fog descends over Soria and the lake becomes smooth as a mirror, it seems as if a faint light still glows in its dark depths. The breath of those who once decided to find God not in the sky, but in the reflection of the water. Tower of the Seven Shadows in Toledo. Old Toledo has long been accustomed to its legends, to the rustle of narrow streets where the stones are steeped in the history of blood, faith, and secrets. But even in this city, where every building holds its own myth, there's a place spoken of in whispers. It's a tower standing on the edge of the old quarter, at the foot of San Cristobal Hill. It's not on maps, nor in guidebooks. Only the elders say that at night, when the moon rises over the Tagus River, 7 shadows emanate from the tower, moving across the ground as if the walls themselves were breathing. Historians have long debated the tower's construction date. Some believe it dated back to the Arab period and served as an observatory, while others believe it was built after the Reconquista as part of a defensive system. However, the tower's internal structure refutes both theories. The tower stands on an octagonal base, constructed of a stone not found anywhere near Toledo or anywhere in Castile. This dark stone, with silvery veins, seems to absorb light. It remains cool to the touch, even in the sun. The first mention of the Tower of Seven Shadows appears in 13th century monastic records. They say it was used for studies of the movement of light and the breath of time. Chroniclers described how, on certain days of the year, rays of light fell on the tower's walls, forming 7 silhouettes on the floor, unseen by any human being. These shadows moved independently of the sun, as if alive. The monks considered them manifestations of the invisible world, and from then on, the tower was known as a place where time reflects itself. According to urban legend, anyone who spent the night in the tower saw their future, but they paid a strange price for this. Part of their own shadow disappeared. In the morning, such people left behind a dim, translucent reflection. Several cases are recorded in 17th century chronicles of curious people infiltrating the tower. One of them, a jeweler named Diego de Mora, lost his sight a few days later, but continued to claim that he sees a light coming from within the walls. In the 19th century, when archaeologists began exploring the old city, the tower was already half destroyed. Inside, they discovered a strange stone circle, inlaid with pieces of copper and silver. It bore engravings depicting the sun, the moon, and 7 lines converging at the center. Scientists speculated that it was an ancient astronomical instrument, perhaps a sundial, but calculations showed that the lines did not correspond to any known astronomical coordinates. When a ray of sunlight penetrated through a hole in the ceiling at midday, it fell precisely on the center of the circle, casting 7 shadows on the walls, seemingly out of thin air. Contemporaries described the phenomenon as a trick of the light, but those who were there reported something different. The shadows moved at varying speeds. Some quickly disappeared, others lingered longer, as if observing. One of the engineers present during the experiments admitted to sensing the presence of people, even though the tower was empty. After this, he refused to return and soon left Toledo. Scientists attempted to find a physical explanation for the phenomenon. The tower's stone likely possessed specular reflective properties, creating an optical illusion. However, the material of the walls did not reflect light in the traditional sense. Spectral measurements revealed that it absorbed most of the visible spectrum and emitted infrared light. In other words, the tower literally absorbed the light and returned it not through the eyes, but as heat. Legend has it that the stone contains the souls of 7 monks who once broke their vow of silence. They attempted to unravel the nature of time and perform a ritual that united light and shadow. But instead of revelation, they found eternal imprisonment. Each of them became a shadow on the wall, doomed to follow the movement of the sun. Since then, the tower has served as a reminder that knowledge without humility becomes a trap. In the 20th century, archaeologists attempted to excavate the underground passage, but work was halted. At a depth of 3 meters, instruments detected strong magnetic fluctuations, causing equipment to malfunction. The metal of the instruments quickly heated up, and compasses spun non-stop. On the 3rd day of excavation, one of the workers lost consciousness and, upon regaining consciousness, claimed to have heard a bell ringing and seen faces emerging from the stone. His words were dismissed as hallucinations, but the underground entrance was subsequently filled in again. Today, the Tower of the 7 Shadows isn't marked on any tourist map. It stands half abandoned among the thickets, and only a few explorers dare to enter. They say a strange peace reigns within. Neither wind nor sound penetrates the walls. If you stand in silence for long enough, shadows actually appear. They glide slowly across the floor, not repeating each other's movements. Sometimes it seems as if one of them stops, as if listening. Physicists studying the structure of the stone confirmed that the tower's material contains rare crystals, capable of distorting light waves. But the phenomenon of the 7 shadows remains unexplained. By all calculations, there should be no more than 3 in the tower. When the sun sets, the walls begin to glow faintly. From the outside, it looks as if the tower itself is emitting light, but from the inside, it seems to emanate from the darkness. Residents of Toledo believe that shadows protect the city. Once a year, on the night of November 1st, someone inevitably sees 7 silhouettes moving across the hill, heading toward the river. They disappear as soon as the moon rises to its zenith. People cross themselves and light candles at the foot of the hill to prevent the tower from falling completely silent. It is said that if even one shadow disappears, the city will lose a piece of its soul. And so, the tower stands, between light and darkness, between science and legend. Its stone is cold, but within it, memory seems to flow. 7 shadows continue their eternal movement, a reminder that every light has a reflection, and that sometimes it is the shadow that preserves the truth longer than the day. Unknown inhabitants of the caves near Segovia. Segovia, an ancient city in the hills of Castile, is known for its aqueduct and palaces, but beneath its cobbled streets lies another world, a world of stone, silence, and legend. Beneath the limestone strata lies a network of caves and passages, the existence of which was known even to the Romans. These labyrinths connect the old city with the Eresma Valley, and their depths extend far beyond what has been explored. It is said that whispers reminiscent of breathing can still be heard there, and the light from lanterns behaves strangely, as if someone lives underground and doesn't like being looked at. The first documented mentions of underground passages date back to the 12th century. Monks from the Abbey of San Antonio de la Floresta recorded that footsteps are heard in the earth when there is silence above. They considered these sounds a harbinger of rain, but peasants spoke of creatures emerging from the fog. Back then, they were called Los Sin Rostros, the faceless ones. They were described as resembling humans, but shorter and moving so quickly that they left only cold in their wake. In the 16th century, townspeople began to notice disappearances. Several artisans quarrying stone for the monastery's construction never returned. Their comrades reported hearing screams from the depths, followed by a roar like the wind blowing through a chimney. After this, the entrances to some caves were filled in, but curiosity always triumphs over fear. The 18th century brought a new wave of rumors when local boys discovered strange footprints in one of the caves, elongated with 3 long toes. In the 19th century, explorer Anselmo Gutierrez, known for his work on the geology of Segovia, attempted to map the underground system. He descended into the caves with 2 assistants and spent 3 days there. His diary, found years later, ends with a strange entry. "They don't want us to measure." After this expedition, Gutierrez disappeared, and his assistants refused to talk about what happened. One of them later went mad, insisting that the earth breathes people who never leave. Modern speleologists have repeatedly attempted to explore the caves, but even with 21st century equipment, they can only partially penetrate them. Lasers detect voids at depths of over 500 meters, but the approaches are blocked by narrow passages, seemingly artificially narrowed. Carved symbols, circles, triangles, and spiraling lines can be found on the walls. No one knows who created them. Radiocarbon dating is of no help. The limestone is too old, while the carving marks appear fresh, as if they were made recently. Photographs taken in 2009 were particularly intriguing. They show what appear to be silhouettes standing deep in the tunnel. The photographer swears no one was there at the time the photo was taken. The shadows were strangely elongated and blurry, as if illuminated from within. Attempts to explain this as a lighting effect were unsuccessful. The camera used to take the photos failed immediately after leaving the cave. Residents of nearby villages still believe that someone lives underground. Hunters say that sometimes, in the pre-dawn hours, a low howl can be heard in the valley, unlike that of either animals or humans. Figures flicker in the fog, their eyes reflecting the light but not blinking. The locals call them guardas del subsuelo, guardians of the underground. According to legend, they appeared before the Romans and guard not gold, but the knowledge left by ancient civilizations. There are even stranger accounts. In 1986, archaeologists exploring an old mine shaft near the aqueduct found a bone similar to a human bone, but with a density twice the normal value. Experts debated its origins for a long time, but were unable to explain it. The specimen later disappeared from the museum. After this incident, excavations ceased, and city authorities officially closed access to most of the underground passages. Scientists put forward rational theories. The sounds are explained by the acoustics of the tunnels, the glow by minerals, the imprints by soil deformation. But no one denies that Segovia stands on a unique cave system, whose lower levels have yet to be mapped. Perhaps colonies of rare animals or natural phenomena causing illusions still exist there. However, even the most skeptical researchers admit that a presence can be felt in these labyrinths. Not a threatening one, but rather an observing one. Sometimes shepherds spending the night in the valley report seeing points of light moving underground, as if someone were walking with torches. Sometimes they hear quiet chanting, like ancient monastic chants, but without words. And when the wind passes through cracks in the rocks, the earth seems to echo, a low, even, almost human voice. The Segovians have become accustomed to living above this mystery. They say that it's not monsters that roam beneath the city, but memory. The memory of those who lived here long before us, who knew how to speak to stone and how to listen to the silence. And until no one dares to descend deeper than their courage allows, the unknown inhabitants of the caves remain a mere shadow between science and myth. Sometimes, when the moon covers the aqueduct at night, a slight chill suddenly appears in the air, and it seems as if someone is passing underfoot, very close, but in another world, a world where darkness has hearing and stone holds breath. The mystery of the Stone Triangle of Navarre. In northern Spain, among the windswept plains of Navarre, where the Pyrenees descend into the valleys, there's a place rarely discussed. It's called the Stone Triangle. 3 peaks, connected by a near-perfect line, form a figure on the terrain that defies natural explanation. Each peak is marked by a megalith, standing on the slopes of Mount El Gori. They don't appear on any ancient map, but 21st century satellite images have shown that these stones form a perfect equilateral triangle with a side length of exactly 730 meters. Scientists still can't determine who built it and why. In the mountains, where even building roads is difficult. The first to report the discovery was a shepherd named Lopez Arizaga in 1948. He noticed that 3 stones, rising from the grass, cast shadows that converged only twice a year, on the spring and autumn equinoxes. It was also discovered that each megalith was aligned precisely with the cardinal directions. Geologists initially dismissed the alignment as a coincidence, but when surveyors took measurements, the coincidence proved too precise to be natural. Since then, the El Gori Triangle has been the subject of debate among archaeologists, astronomers, and historians. The megaliths are made of gray granite, a type not found within a 20-kilometer radius. Therefore, the stones were deliberately transported here, each weighing approximately 20 tons. The technology used to install them is unknown. At the base of one stone, carved symbols were discovered, 3 lines intersecting at a 60-degree angle, and a symbol resembling an eye. When archaeologists illuminated the drawing at night, it glowed with a faint blue light, as if the stone had absorbed the daylight and was now returning it. Legends about the triangle existed before. Elders from the neighboring village of Urdas said that the earth sings here. They claimed that if you stand in the center of the triangle and loudly pronounce a name, the voice returns distorted, as if someone were repeating it from deep within the earth. Ethnographers dismissed these tales as superstitions until, in the mid-20th century, physicists documented the strange acoustic properties of the field. The sound was indeed amplified and reflected not from the rocks, but from a subsurface layer, as if there was a void beneath the surface. In 1962, a team of archaeologists led by Professor Martinez del Rio arrived here. They set up camp in the center of the triangle and began drilling. At a depth of 9 meters, the drill bit stalled, and a gust of hot air erupted from the ground. A few minutes later, white smoke, smelling of iron, began billowing from the hole. After this, the instrument stopped working. The team stopped digging, and the professor wrote in his journal, "This isn't rock, it's something breathing." Since then, research has been sporadic. Occasionally, strange light phenomena have appeared in the area around the triangle. In 1988, local residents observed 3 fiery spheres above the peaks, hovering in the sky for several minutes before disappearing. The military attributed this to atmospheric glare, but witnesses claimed the spheres moved in unison, repeating the shape of the triangle. Scientists attempted to determine the age of the megaliths by analyzing lichens. The results showed that the stones were at least 5,000 years old, making them Neolithic. However, if this is true, the triangle was created long before the first known settlements appeared in the region. Furthermore, the orientation of its sides does not correspond to the present-day Earth poles, but to the positions they occupied approximately 3,000 years BC. This has led some researchers to speculate that the triangle was used for astronomical observations and possibly served as a star map. Interestingly, each vertex of the triangle coincides with the location of ancient water sources, now dried up. Radiocarbon dating revealed traces of ancient settlements within a 2-kilometer radius, but no evidence of permanent habitation. It's as if people only came here temporarily. Perhaps the triangle was a sacred site where rituals associated with the sun and water took place. However, the most enigmatic detail is a stone slab found in 1992 near the southeastern summit. It depicts the same triangle, but within it is a spiral extending downwards. Words in an unknown language are engraved along the edges. Linguists have been unable to determine their origin. The alphabet resembles neither Iberian nor Phoenician inscriptions. Under ultraviolet light, handprints appear on the slab, as if someone touched it thousands of years ago. Modern researchers call this place an energy anomaly. Measurements show fluctuations in the magnetic field and compass instability. Some people feel a slight tingling sensation when standing in the center of the triangle, while others report a humming sound. Tourists who have spent the night here have reported seeing lights creeping along the ground and hearing quiet footsteps, even though no one was nearby. Locals avoid these places after sunset. They believe that something sleeps beneath the triangle and must not be disturbed. Legend has it that the stones were placed there to contain a power emanating from the depths. On the equinox, when the sun rises directly over the northern peak, light filters through the cracks between the slabs, and a new triangle of light appears on the ground, like a reflection of the invisible world. Some believe this place is an ancient map pointing the way to something greater. Others believe the triangle is a portal connecting earth and sky, but perhaps it's much simpler. People millennia ago sensed what we call spatial energy and attempted to capture it in stone, to give it a form understandable to the eye. When you stand in the center of the triangle, the wind seems quieter, the air denser, and the shadows of the trees seem to move differently. Birds avoid the area, and even the sound of your own footsteps seems alien. And then you begin to understand. The mystery of Navarre's stone triangle lies not in its shape or its age. It lies in the fact that all living things here sense the presence of something nameless, yet always there. The silent order in Galicia. In northwestern Spain, where the ocean crashes against the cliffs and the air is thick with salt and the scent of wet stone, stands the monastery of San Mauricio de Corcunya. Hidden among fog-shrouded hills, the road to it winds through an ancient eucalyptus forest, where even during the day, darkness reigns. Locals call it the Silent House, because no one who lives within its walls speaks a word. For hundreds of years, the monks of this order have vowed not only silence, but complete isolation from the outside world. However, the mystery surrounding them has always transcended religious ritual. According to ancient chronicles, the order arose in the late 12th century, after a great storm struck the coast of Galicia. That year, the sea washed ashore dozens of ships, and at dawn, shepherds found a man in a black robe, unconscious, among the wreckage. He spoke a language no one understood. When he came to, the first thing he did was ask for shelter in an abandoned chapel. From that moment on, the history of the order began, whose members called themselves Custodios del Silencio, guardians of silence. The monastery grew around that very chapel. Its architecture is astonishing. The walls are constructed of slate without mortar, and the vaults are unusually shaped, as if designed to amplify sound, yet absolute silence reigns within. Even footsteps leave no echo. Researchers who visited the monastery in the 19th century wrote that sounds seemed absorbed by the air. Some believed this was the result of special acoustics, others the consequence of rituals no one spoke of. According to the monastery's records, every monk took a vow of silence not only in life, but also after death. Bodies were kept within the walls of the underground crypt, wrapped in black cloth, and not a single tombstone bore a name, only a carved circle with a dot in the center. Only once, in the 17th century, was a traveler from Porto, a physician named Thomas Fonseca, admitted to the monastery. He described in his diary how he heard a low hum emanating from the dungeons at night, as if hundreds of voices were uttering words without making a sound. When he asked the abbot, he pointed to the sky and drew a circle on the ground. In the 20th century, the order was considered extinct. After the Civil War, the monastery was deserted, and it was only in the 1990s that climbers wandering the hills discovered the building was still inhabited. They saw figures in gray robes moving around the courtyard with lit lamps. When rescuers arrived, the monks had disappeared, but candles burned in the rooms, and open books written in an incomprehensible language lay on the tables. Linguists who studied the manuscripts concluded that it was an artificial alphabet, constructed from a combination of Greek and Aramaic characters. The text repeated the same words, respira and silencio. The phrase translates as, breathe in silence. It was suggested that the order practiced breathing practices and contemplation, perhaps striving to achieve a state in which speech was no longer necessary. However, in the margins of the manuscripts, diagrams of the human body were drawn, with dots on the chest and forehead. This led some researchers to speculate about knowledge that transcended religion. Later expeditions discovered a system of narrow corridors in the monastery cellars, leading to a circular hall. In the center is a stone basin, which still produces a faint echo when a single word is whispered. The sound lasts for several seconds and then disappears, as if absorbed. When physicists measured the acoustics, they recorded a phenomenon. A low hum arose in the hall at a frequency of 32 Hz, imperceptible to the ear but causing tremors. Some participants in the experiment felt dizzy and were forced to go outside. Legend has it that the monks of the order discovered a way to hold sound in the air. They believed that every word was alive and had weight, and that if too many were spoken, the world would lose its balance. Therefore, they chose silence as a form of preservation. In one of the discovered letters, the abbot wrote, "Words destroy, silence unites. When a person learns to hear without ears, then God will answer." Today, the monastery stands abandoned. The stone walls are covered in moss, the doors are half collapsed, but every spring, pilgrims come. They sit on the steps and listen to the silence. Some claim to hear faint echoes of chanting, impossible to record. No microphone can pick up those frequencies. Scientists attribute this to suggestion, but the sense of presence is too distinct to be considered an illusion. Locals say that on the foggiest nights, glowing lights appear near the monastery. They move slowly, like breath, and disappear when approached. People believe these are the souls of monks, continuing their silence. Sometimes, at dawn, bare footprints are found at the entrance, leading deep into the hill, and each time, the rain washes them away, as if the earth itself hides their tracks. Today, San Maurizio de Corcugna remains closed to visitors. The church officially declares it an architectural monument, but there is no reliable information about its interior. Some researchers believe that the few remaining guardians of the order still live behind the walls. They do not speak, do not come out to the public, and perhaps pray not with words, but with their breath. As you stand at the monastery gates, the wind suddenly dies down. The forest falls silent, the birds stop singing. The air becomes thick, as if silence truly dwells within it, and it seems that this silence contains not emptiness, but a presence, ancient, calm, and watchful, like the breath of the world that man ceased to hear when he learned to speak. Prophecies in the Church of San Salvador. In the south of Castile, in the small town of Valderrama, stands the Church of San Salvador, unremarkable from the outside and seemingly deliberately hidden among the houses. Its stone walls have darkened with age, and its bell tower has long since become crooked, but locals walk around it with respect and awe. For within, hidden beneath a layer of soot and dust, lie frescoes that don't simply decorate the vaults, they tell the future. Neither the artist nor the time of their creation is known, but the images depict events that no one could have foreseen when the church was built, and each of them has come true. The first recorded mention of the mysterious frescoes dates back to the 16th century. Local priest Don Miguel de la Serna mentioned that the walls depicted scenes not found in scripture: crumbling cities, iron birds carrying flames, and a man dressed in glass holding a glowing circle. Initially, these paintings were considered symbolic, but centuries later, many saw in them a strange resemblance to real-life disasters, fires, wars, and even modern machines. The 18th century brought another wave of interest. When restorers cleared away some of the plaster, new images emerged, unfinished, as if someone had started and left it unfinished. Among them is the figure of a woman standing on the seashore, with a wave rising higher than the towers behind her. After the Lisbon earthquake of 1755, which triggered a tsunami, the residents of Valderrama became convinced the fresco had predicted the disaster. But the most disturbing discovery occurred in the 20th century, when art restorer Ramiro Castello decided to conduct an ultraviolet scan of the paint layer. Beneath the images, he discovered a second painting, hidden for centuries. It contained scenes that did not resemble religious ones: a masked man with tubes resembling modern hoses, a crowd of people in identical cloaks, and a house billowing smoke. Ramiro wrote in his diary, "These scenes are inexplicable. They seem to come from the future." A week later, he died in a car accident while returning from church. His colleagues are certain his death was accidental, but in town, word spread that he had uncovered a secret that should not have been touched. The Church of San Salvador is distinguished by its strange architecture. The windows are angled so that they don't follow the sun's path, and the light falls in such a way that on certain days, March 21st and September 21st, a beam of light passes directly across the central fresco, illuminating the face of an angel holding a book. When this happens, the colors on the wall seem to come alive. The gold shimmers and the white turns a cool blue. Priests consider this a symbol of divine presence, but researchers are certain the artist understood the laws of light and time far better than they realize. In the 21st century, the church was examined by physicists and art historians. Using infrared cameras, they discovered traces of ancient plaster beneath the wall layers, with inscriptions carved into them. Part of the inscription was legible: Tempus loquitur silentio. Time speaks in silence. A spiral is drawn around this phrase, receding into the wall. Some scholars have suggested that the building may have been built on the site of an ancient sanctuary, where rituals related to observing the movements of the stars and cycles were performed. But the most terrifying of all is the last fresco, uncovered during restoration in 2009. It depicts a city bathed in red light and figures covering their faces with their hands. Above them is a black circle from which rays of light shine. The date on the stone frame beneath the painting is 1571. Coincidence or not, 2 years after the fresco's discovery, all of Spain experienced record heat and fires that destroyed dozens of villages. Afterward, the church was closed again, and entry is permitted only on religious holidays. Residents of Valderrama claim to hear a sound like a brush on the wall at night, as if someone is still painting. Sometimes, under the moonlight, new lines appear on the plaster that weren't there during the day. Tourists have tried to photograph these phenomena, but instead of drawings, the pictures show blurred silhouettes and, in some, the reflection of a faceless human figure. It is believed that the artist who painted the frescoes belonged to a secret order of artists who believed that paints could preserve information about the future. They used minerals sensitive to solar cycles and created images that responded to changing light. If this is true, then San Salvador is not just a temple, but a unique time calendar in which the past and future are intertwined in layers of plaster. However, old chronicles tell a different story. One 17th century manuscript mentions a monk who saw the centuries. He is unnamed, but it says he painted not images, but shadows of future days. Perhaps he was the one who created these frescoes. The same document contains the line, "When silence becomes louder than prayer, the day that has been painted will come." Today, the church is protected by the state, but access is restricted. Scientists fear damaging the paint, and priests fear awakening what they call a prophetic echo. Locals place candles outside the closed doors, believing they are warding off misfortune from the city. And when the moon rises over San Salvador at night, images once again appear on the walls inside, quiet, trembling, like the breath of stone, foreshadowing what has yet to come. Thus the church remains silent, as if observing time itself. And anyone who peers inside feels that the past has not passed away here, but is simply waiting for its moment to speak again, with color, light, and a silence that echoes the future. The curse of the Medina Sidonia family. In southern Andalusia, in the ancient city of Sanlúcar de Barrameda, the majestic palace of the Dukes of Medina Sidonia rises above the Guadalquivir River. Its walls, covered in clay the color of old gold, have survived wars, epidemics, and fires. But behind the facade, adorned with a coat of arms featuring 3 towers, lies a history that still chills the air. It is said to be a curse that has lingered for centuries, haunting every descendant of the illustrious family. No one knows how it all began, but everyone knows how it ended, with sudden death, madness, or the disappearance of those who sought to uncover the truth. The family history begins in the 14th century, when Rodrigo de Guzman, the first duke, received lands from the Castilian king for his military services. He built a castle on a cliff overlooking the entire bay and installed a stone slab brought from a destroyed Moorish sanctuary in the basement. From then on, the house grew around it, and according to ancient chroniclers, a candle always burned in the center of the basement, unlit. Its light never faded, even during storms. The curse was first mentioned in 1576, when Duke Juan Alonso de Medina Sidonia led the Invincible Armada. Before setting sail, his mother, an elderly duchess, allegedly warned her son that the sea would not welcome them as long as a candle burned in the cellar. Juan laughed and ordered the cellar walled up. A few months later, the fleet was destroyed by a storm. of the thousands of ships, only a handful returned. When the messenger brought the news to Sanlúcar, the candle, according to servants, extinguished itself, leaving the cellar with the smell of salt and burning. From then on, the house was shunned. Each new heir brought misfortune. One died of an unknown illness, another went mad, and a third disappeared, leaving only a glove at the gate. A letter from a Dominican monk who visited the family in the 17th century survives in the palace archives. He wrote, "It is not a spirit that dwells in their hall, but the shadow of a memory. This house is not cursed by God, but by people who have forgotten their oath." This oath, according to legend, was made at the founding of the family. Rodrigo de Guzman promised to protect the stone brought from the Moorish sanctuary and never attempt to discover its origin. The slab was engraved with words in an unknown language and depicted a circle with a triangle within. This symbol was said to be linked to ancient Seville cults, which worshipped the light contained within stone. When the palace began to be rebuilt in the 18th century, the architect ordered the slab removed. A week later, he died after falling from scaffolding. The workers refused to touch the stone, and it was resealed beneath the floor. During the Napoleonic Wars, the house was plundered, but even the soldiers refused to descend into the basement. Their reports contain only a short phrase, "Una luz debajo del suelo," a light underground. After this, the ducal family abandoned the castle for decades. When their descendants returned in the 19th century, they discovered a faint glow still burning in the basement. There were no candles, only a stone emitting a dim light. One of the young dukes, Luis de Medina, decided to destroy it and ordered the slab smashed with a hammer. The next day, a rare atmospheric phenomenon appeared in the sky above Sanlúcar, a green aurora similar to the northern lights. Luis died in his sleep that same night. In the 20th century, the house was converted into a museum and the curse seemed to subside. But in the 1990s, restorers examining the cellars again stumbled upon the sealed niche. Behind it lay a black slab, still emitting a faint glow. The stone was cold, even though the surrounding air was warm. Scientists took samples and discovered an unknown mineral, not found in Spain or Europe. It didn't reflect light. It absorbed it and emitted it after a few seconds. It was then that the first suggestion was made that this stone might be the remnant of an ancient meteorite from which the Moors fashioned amulets. But the old-timers of Sanlúcar insist that the underground light has nothing to do with science. They say that at night, footsteps are heard in the house, as if someone were descending the stairs and stopping at the floor. Sometimes, a woman in an antique dress is seen in the hallways, and the smell of sea salt fills the air. She is said to be the last duchess, who died in a fire in 1843. Her body was never found, only the burnt fragments of her jewelry. The curse of Medina Sidonia has become the stuff of legend, but it has a chilling consistency. Anyone who has tried to remove the stone from the cellar has died or disappeared. And those who have even seen it say they dream of the sea afterwards, where the water turns black and a light glows beneath the waves. Today, the palace is open to visitors. Tourists take photos in the halls, unaware that beneath their feet still lies a stone whose glow cannot be extinguished. Guides avoid the basement and do not answer questions. Only the elderly caretaker, who lives in the palace gatehouse, sometimes says, looking out over the river, "A curse is not an evil spirit. It is a memory that refuses to be forgotten." When the sun sets and the water of the Guadalquivir reflects in the windows, it seems as if a dim light has been rekindled underground. It breathes through the stone like the living heart of the house, reminding us that even the most ancient vows never lose their power. They simply wait for someone to dare break them again. Sunken city near Cadiz, off the southern coast of Spain, where the Atlantic meets the Mediterranean beneath a thick layer of murky water, lies a place local fishermen simply call La Ciudad Dormida, the sleeping city. Its outlines are barely discernible in the light of underwater spotlights, straight streets, ruined columns, and dark arches disappearing into the sand. This area lies near Cadiz, an ancient Phoenician harbor, and is officially considered a seismically active zone. But the elders who live along the coast know otherwise. The city sank not because of an earthquake, but because of sin. The legend of the sleeping city has been passed down here since ancient times. It was recorded by the Arab geographer al-Bakri in the 11th century. He wrote that on the site of today's Cadiz stood a city of light, where priests worshipped a god who lived in the depths of the sea. It was said that every morning the sun rose not from the horizon, but from the water, and was reflected in the golden dome of the temple standing on the shore. But one day, the sea claimed the city, and the dome disappeared as if sucked into the abyss. The first modern evidence of underwater ruins appeared in 1930. Fishermen noticed that their nets often snagged on stone blocks, and occasionally fragments of carved slabs would rise to the surface. One of them depicted figures standing in a circle, holding mirror-like objects. Archaeologists initially believed it to be an artifact from the Roman period, but further research revealed the carving to be much older. The stone was estimated to be over 4,000 years old. In 1965, a team of divers from the University of Seville conducted the first full-scale survey. At a depth of 20 meters, they discovered a rectangular platform framed by stone slabs. In the center was a huge circular pedestal, approximately 15 meters in diameter. Its surface was covered in symbols resembling a combination of Phoenician and prehistoric symbols. When the divers turned on a spotlight, the slabs began to reflect light in an unusual way. Not like limestone or granite, but as if they contained something translucent, like glass. The instruments recorded a faint glow, even after the lights were turned off. The expedition caused a sensation, but the research was soon halted. Several team members fell ill with a strange fever, and one died 3 months later, complaining of persistent tinnitus. Scientists dismissed this as a coincidence, but classified all materials. At the end of the 20th century, with the advent of modern sonar, geophysicists returned to the topic. Seafloor scanning revealed a structure covering approximately 1.5 kilometers, consisting of intersecting straight streets. Their orientation suggested a non-chaotic layout. The city appeared to have been laid out according to the principles of a star map. At the center stood a spiral-shaped structure pointing northwest toward the ancient setting of the star Sirius. Some researchers saw similarities with legends of the sunken city of Atlantis, but official archaeology remained cautious. In 2011, oceanographers from Malaga conducted underwater mapping using drones. Footage transmitted from the depths revealed 3 massive columns and stone steps descending into the sand. But what astonished everyone was the clear bas-relief of an eye surrounded by waves on one of the columns. Beneath it was an inscription in an unrecognized language, but with Greek-like lettering. Computer analysis revealed that the symbols repeat in a specific sequence, creating a rhythm reminiscent of a musical notation. It has been suggested that beneath Cadiz lies not a city, but a religious structure, an ancient observatory connected to the sea. The shape of the streets may have channeled tidal waves, creating a sound resonance perceived as music. Perhaps it was this phenomenon that gave rise to the myth of the singing sea, preserved in old fishermen's songs. Local fishermen still claim that on certain nights a hum, like an organ chord, rises from the depths. It can be heard for miles and disappears as suddenly as it appeared. Older fishermen say these are the voices of those who vanished with the city. When the sound becomes especially loud, ripples appear on the surface, and the sea seems alive. In the 21st century, Spanish archaeologists, with the support of UNESCO, launched a new exploration attempt. However, after a few weeks, the project was shelved. The official reason was a lack of funding. The unofficial explanation was instrument malfunction and the loss of 2 drones, which simply stopped transmitting. The last images received from their cameras showed a dark arch, behind which a faint light seemed to flicker. Since then, the area around Cadiz has been closed to private expeditions. However, sea divers sometimes report seeing a ghostly glow underwater, reminiscent of city lights. Some claim to feel a pressure, as if the water itself were pushing them back, preventing them from getting closer. On foggy nights, bubbles rise from the depths, and a soft sound reminiscent of breathing can be heard on the surface. Scientists are trying to find a rational explanation. They talk about underwater gases, faults, and rare chemical reactions. But belief in the sleeping city remains. For locals, this place is alive. They claim the city is not destroyed, but sleeps, awaiting those who will remember it again. When you gaze at the bay at dusk, the surface of the water seems to ripple slightly, like transparent glass beneath which a dim light glows. And in that moment, you realize perhaps the myth of Atlantis was born not somewhere far away, but here, off the coast of Cadiz, where the sea still holds the breath of those who built a city for the stars and disappeared beneath the waves, leaving only the music that still resounds in the depths. Frescoes depicting a starship in the monastery of Cuenca. In eastern Spain, among the rocky cliffs of Cuenca, where houses hang over the abyss as if carved from thin air, stands the ancient monastery of Santa Maria de las Peñas. From the road, it appears to be part of the cliff, but within, its walls hold one of the strangest and most disturbing secrets of Spanish art. Hidden away in a side aisle, behind a narrow arch, is a chapel whose frescoes depict not scenes from scripture, but something else entirely, an object resembling a huge metal ship, from which figures in luminous robes emerge. These images don't fit into any known artistic style, and no one can explain how they came to be in a monastery built in the 13th century. The discovery was first reported by the monk historian Manuel Rojas in 1892. He described a fresco depicting a domed object hovering above the mountains, with numerous thin rays falling to the ground. Below, people are depicted with outstretched arms, as if worshipping the light. The monk suggested this was a symbol of the resurrection or ascension, but the object's shape and technique did not correspond to any biblical tradition. The figure had contours reminiscent of metal, and the shadows were rendered as if the artist understood how light reflects off a smooth surface. When restoration work began on the frescoes in the 20th century, other images were discovered beneath the top layer of paint, more detailed, but executed by a different hand. The same figures were depicted, but their proportions were unusual. Larger heads, elongated bodies, almond-shaped eyes. One of the restorers, Francisco Mendoza, wrote that he felt a strong chill when touching these sections of the wall, as if the stone held energy within itself. After completing the work, he fell ill and never returned to the monastery. The chapel walls themselves have a unique structure. They are almost 2 meters thick, and narrow voids resembling channels were discovered beneath the frescoes. Instruments revealed a residual magnetic field within them, as if electricity had once flowed through them. Engineers hypothesized that metallic inclusions in the monastery's foundations could be responsible for the anomaly. However, sample analysis revealed nothing more than limestone and traces of rare minerals similar to meteoric iron. Art historians have sought rational explanations. Some believe it's an allegory, reflecting medieval notions of the celestial realm. Others believe the artist was inspired by stories of luminaries and comets, often perceived as divine signs. But the image all too closely resembles what a modern person would call a flying machine. Its body is divided into sections with porthole-like openings and even a staircase-like structure. In 1958, archaeology professor Carlos Arceño conducted a spectral analysis of the paint. He found that the pigments contained particles of mica and silver, used in rare types of reflective paint. This composition was unknown in Spain before the Renaissance, yet the fresco layers dated to the late 13th century. This means the artist used a material whose origins remain unclear. During the restoration in 2005, laser scanning revealed another detail. Hidden beneath the central image is an inscription visible only under infrared light. It reads, "Lux venit per circulum." Light came through the circle. This phrase appears in late Templar manuscripts, where it denotes the entrance of light into matter. Following this discovery, access to the chapel was restricted, and photography was banned. Locals say that at night, when the moon reflects off the monastery windows, the walls emit a soft ringing sound, like the vibration of a string. Sometimes a bluish glow is seen above the roof, and the air around seems to tremble. Priests attribute this to a peculiar microclimate, but elders say the monastery stands on a spot where the sky once descended to earth. There's a legend, recorded in the 16th century. On the night the builders were laying the foundations, a luminous disk appeared over the valley, and from it a beam descended, illuminating the stones so brightly that they turned white. The abbot then said, "Let this be a sign of blessing." An altar was erected on that spot, and it was there, centuries later, that strange frescoes were discovered. Modern researchers from Cuenca attempted to conduct a ground-penetrating radar survey beneath the monastery. At a depth of 10 meters, the instruments detected a regularly shaped cavity, but access is impossible due to the risk of collapse. Some speculate that the underground chamber may be an ancient sanctuary, the source of the legend of the light from the stone. Today, the monastery of Santa Maria de las Peñas is closed to the public. Only occasionally are scholars, working under the supervision of the church, allowed in. They claim the frescoes are too unusual to be fake, and that the layers of paint do indeed date from different eras. The meaning of the images remains unanswered. Those who have seen them with their own eyes describe a strange sensation, as if the drawings were moving when illuminated by candlelight. The figures, carved centuries ago, seem to come to life, and it seems as if the creatures are looking not up at the sky, but directly at the viewer. Perhaps all this is just a coincidence, a strange interweaving of symbols, light, and time. Or perhaps the artist was genuinely trying to convey something he himself had seen or was told by those who knew more than they were allowed to know. The frescoes of the Cuenca Monastery remain a silent reminder that the history of Spain preserves traces of what man still cannot name. And when night falls on the gorges of Cuenca, the moon glides along the walls of the monastery, and in the reflections of its light, for a moment it seems as if the metal ship is once again preparing to rise from the stone, carrying with it a secret that time has only allowed us to sketch, but not to understand. The legend of the Alhambra Guardians. Granada sleeps beneath a heavy, starry sky, and above it, like a petrified flame, rises the Alhambra, a palace where the walls breathe light and the air is saturated with the whisper of water and marble. Thousands of tourists flock here during the day, but at night everything changes. The corridors empty, the fountain's water darkens, and in the courtyard of the Lions you can hear footsteps that no one makes. People say these are guardians, spirits who have left their bodies, but not the palace. They stand guard not for gold or the secrets of the Moors, but for time, which stood still in these halls when the last candle of Islamic Granada was extinguished. The legend dates back to 1492, when King Boabdil, the last Nasrid ruler, left the city, handing over the keys to the Catholic monarchs. Chronicles recount that that night, in the Hall of Pines, he left not only tears, but also a command. 7 of his most loyal warriors were to remain in the Alhambra, hidden behind the walls, to guard it until the end of time. At dawn, they disappeared, and no one has seen their bodies since. But people claim to hear footsteps under the flagstones in the silence, as if a guard were marching from the depths of the palace. In the 16th century, when royal guards were stationed in the Alhambra, soldiers began complaining of strange phenomena. At night, candles would glow in the Hall of Mirrors, though no one had lit them. Shadows of people in long cloaks would appear on the walls, and footsteps would sound like invisible guards walking on the marble. The garrison commander ordered a guard posted, but those stationed at the gates at night returned in the morning with pale faces. One of them wrote in his journal, "They stand nearby, but do not look. We feel their breath, and the marble beneath our feet vibrates as if alive." During the Napoleonic Wars, the palace was nearly destroyed. The French officers who had set up headquarters there spoke derisively of the legends. But when one of them, Captain Dumont, attempted to open a secret niche under the fountain to retrieve hidden treasures, something strange happened. That night, soldiers heard a scream, and in the morning, they found the captain dead. His eyes were open, and his skin was covered in frost, as if he had died of exposure in the heat. After this, the French abandoned the hall, leaving everything untouched. In the 19th century, Romantic writers visiting Granada described the Alhambra as a place where the past never dies. One of them, the American Washington Irving, lived within its walls and wrote of hearing rustling sounds and muffled footsteps at night, like the breath of wind in the corridors. He considered this the poetry of antiquity, but later admitted that he sometimes felt as if the shadows in the Hall of Pines were turning to face him. In the 20th century, archaeologists conducting restoration discovered a system of underground passages beneath the hall of the Abencerrages, leading to the center of the palace. Handprints and boot prints were preserved on the tunnel walls. One of the workers said the stone was as warm as a human body. At a depth of 12 meters, they discovered 7 niches covered with slabs. Each contained a crescent moon symbol and the engraved words, "La guardia no duerme," the guard never sleeps. The slabs were not opened, believing the find to be a tomb. But the next day, according to eyewitnesses, the water in the fountain in the Court of the Lions turned reddish, and the palace was closed for a week. Scientists attribute this to iron in the water, but the public is convinced the guards have awakened. Guides and caretakers of the Alhambra still report that at night, only one lantern works in some halls because the others burn out. Cameras run out of battery for no apparent reason, and microphones pick up a faint noise, like quiet breathing. One guard, who worked there for 20 years, said he sometimes feels someone's hand on his shoulder as he walks around the courtyard. He turns around, no one's there, but a mark remains on his sleeve as if a dusty hand had touched it. Legend has it that the guardians will reappear when the bell buried beneath the Alhambra's very foundations rings. Its sound, it is said, can awaken those sleeping within the stone to protect the palace from destruction. Several years ago, ground-penetrating radar did indeed detect a metallic object beneath the North Tower. Work was halted. Churches and archaeologists disagreed on whether to disturb the site. There's another legend. It's said that once every century, a woman veiled in white appears in the Hall of Mirrors and walks past the columns without touching the floor. She's called the Guardian of Light. She belongs neither to the Moors nor to the Christians. She is the Alhambra itself, having taken human form to watch over its guardians. Anyone who sees her must remain silent, lest they lose their voice. One guard, who claimed to have seen the woman, actually went blind a week later. He said, "She was light, but that light looked through me." From a scientific perspective, all the phenomena are explainable. Drafts, temperature fluctuations, electrical discharges. But enter the Hall of Pines at night, when the moon's reflection falls on the marble, and you hear a soft metallic ringing, as if swords were touching. And it seems as if this sound carries the breath of the 7 warriors, whom Boabdil left here as eternal guard. Today the Alhambra shines like a museum, but anyone who lingers here after closing knows, time hasn't passed within its walls. It simply lies hidden, guarding the silence, lest anyone forget that those who cannot be seen still serve within these halls. And when the moon rises over Granada, its light glides across the columns, and the shadows line up, as if the warriors have been called to their guard once again. Then it becomes clear. The guardians of the Alhambra are not a legend. They are the very memory of Spain, frozen in marble and refusing to be forgotten. Bloody River in Valencia. On the outskirts of Valencia, far from the tourist streets and noisy cafes, flows the Turia River, calm, shallow, with green banks. But upstream, where the old orange plantations begin, there's a place that locals try not to remember. Here, in the narrow San Miguel Gorge, the water sometimes turns red. Not because of the sunset, not because of the clay, but because the river itself seems to be colored from within. This phenomenon lasts only a few minutes and doesn't repeat on a schedule. Scientists call it a rare chemical process, but locals are convinced. The river is drinking up memories. The first records of the strange coloring of the water date back to the 16th century. A Franciscan monk's account, written during a terrible epidemic, survives in the city archives of Valencia. He claimed that on the day the plague reached the monastery, the water in the Turia turned red, and a smell of iron appeared over the river. After this, many of the sick died before they could see the morning. The monk wrote, "The blood of the earth rose to the light, for God had turned away." Since then, the river has turned red whenever disaster loomed over the city. In 1755, on the day of the earthquake, in 1899, before the flood that destroyed part of Valencia, and in 1936, on the eve of the Civil War. Whether this is a coincidence or not, no one knows, but the fact remains. When the water turns turbid and deep red, the city comes to a standstill. In the 20th century, attempts were made to explain the phenomenon scientifically. Hydrologists hypothesized that deep within the riverbed, there was an underground spring saturated with iron. However, chemical analysis of the water showed the opposite. The metal levels remained unchanged. Furthermore, the color only appeared in one stretch, about 200 meters long, after which it disappeared, as if the river itself had purified itself. The composition of the water remained unchanged, but its taste became metallic, and fish floated to the surface, seemingly out of breath. Legends attribute the origin of this phenomenon to an ancient curse. It is said that in the 13th century, during the Reconquista, a battle took place here between the army of the Arab emir and the Knights of Aragon. The ground absorbed so much blood that, according to eyewitnesses, the water ran red for 3 days. When the battle ended, the survivors buried the dead right in the banks, without even having time to erect crosses. Since then, the souls of the fallen have found no peace, and the river periodically reminds people of the price of their victories. In the 19th century, farmers whose fields were irrigated with this water noticed that their harvests were failing after these red days. The grain turned black, and the oranges became spotted. Priests then began coming to the valley to perform purification rites. They threw candles into the river and chanted psalms, but sometimes the candles didn't float, but sank beneath the water, as if someone were pulling them down. After these ceremonies, several monks fell ill with an unknown fever. These days, the phenomenon occurs less frequently, but always unexpectedly. In the spring of 2007, a tourist filming the landscape with a drone captured the water in the Turia, changing color from green to a deep crimson in just a few minutes. The video went viral, but was soon removed at the request of local authorities. Scientists attributed the phenomenon to a release of benthic bacteria, but residents claimed that the sky above the valley glowed scarlet that night, and the air smelled of rust. Researchers from the University of Valencia measured the magnetic field in the San Miguel area. It was found to be twice the normal level. Moreover, at low sound frequencies, around 40 hertz, the water began to vibrate slightly, as if responding to an invisible call. This effect attracted the interest of physicists, but they couldn't find an explanation. Some believed an unknown fault ran beneath the river, others that the source was a cluster of ferrous rocks. Local legends go further. Old people tell of a faceless man who appears near the shore when the water turns red. He stands knee-deep in the river and looks toward the city, though he has no eyes. Anyone who meets his gaze suffers a long illness. Sometimes afterward, bare footprints are found on the stones, as if left by hot clay. People say this is the guardian of Turia, an ancient spirit guarding the peace of the fallen. Sometimes at night, a strange fog sweeps through the valley, and the water seems to freeze. It reflects silhouettes not present on the shore. Cameras record a pulse-like sound, steady and low, as if the river itself were breathing. Some researchers, analyzing the sound spectrum, discovered a similarity with the human heartbeat. Thus arose the theory that Turia is alive, and the red color is not an impurity, but the very blood of the earth. The church forbids rituals in this place, considering it unclean. But every autumn, on the night of November the 1st, locals gather at the gorge, bring candles, and leave them on the stones. They say this calms the waters. If the candle burns steadily, the year will be calm. If the flame goes out instantly, expect trouble. And when the wind brings the smell of metal, everyone moves away from the shore, because they know the river is awake. Today, scientists continue to search for an explanation for the phenomenon, but acknowledge that it defies the usual laws of nature. No analysis reveals any impurities. No camera captures the source of the color. But the people of Valencia still believe that Turia remembers everything: wars, illnesses, oaths, and fear. And when the earth can no longer bear the pain, it gives it to the water. If you come there at dawn, before the sun has risen and fog clung to the slopes, the water appears dark, almost black, and suddenly a scarlet hue appears on the surface, like a breath, like a warning. At that moment, it becomes clear. The river means no harm. It simply reminds you that blood is also memory, and that all that has been spilled will one day return, along with the reflection of the sky, where every dawn is tinged with the same red shadow as the Turia, an eternal river that carries not only life but also guilt. Fallen angels figurines in Madrid. Madrid, bustling and vibrant, is unaccustomed to secrets. Its streets sparkle with neon, and it seems as if the past has sunk beneath the slabs of asphalt. But deep beneath the Plaza de San Andres, where an old Augustinian monastery once stood, something was discovered during the construction of underground utilities in the 20th century that even today sends chills down archaeologists' spines. Small stone figurines, just 30 centimeters tall, carved with eerie precision. Their faces are neither human nor angelic. They depict creatures with outstretched wings, folded forward, as if in a gesture of penitence. Some retain traces of paint, scarlet, gray, gold. On their backs are carved symbols resembling jagged stars. Thus began the story of Madrid's fallen angels, whose origins no one dares to speak openly about. The figurines were discovered by chance in 1962, when workers were digging a trench for a new sewer system. The chamber they were lying in turned out to be sealed from the inside. 7 figurines were discovered, and although all were made of the same type of stone, gray limestone, its texture was distinctive. It seemed to absorb light and remain cool to the touch even in the sun. Archaeologists delivered the find to the museum, but strange things soon began to happen. 2 restorers complained of insomnia and disturbing dreams in which they heard the rustling of wings and a humming sound resembling low singing. Based on their stylistic features, it was assumed that the figurines date back to the 15th century, to the late Gothic period. However, sculpture of that period was not known for such anatomical precision. Muscles, feathers, and sinews were all carved with surgical detail. Furthermore, pigment analysis revealed that the paint contained particles of a rare mineral, cinnabar, mixed with an unknown binder. This composition did not correspond to any known Spanish technique. One of the figurines depicted a creature seated on a stone pedestal with its head bowed. On its chest was a triangular depression, inside which was a tiny gold plate engraved with the word caído. According to legend, when archaeologists attempted to remove the plate, the air in the room became thick, and instruments recorded a sharp drop in temperature. After this, the object was returned to its place. Many researchers associate these figurines with the order of the monk Dominic Soares, who operated in Madrid in the 16th century. This man became famous for his dark teachings about the light of the fallen, and claimed that souls, neither damned nor saved, existed between worlds, seeking a body to return to. Soares believed that art could seal them and prevent their return. Some believe the figurines were part of his ritual, not statues but seals, locking something within the stone. A document dated 1564 has been preserved in the archives of the monastery of San Andres, stating, "7 guardians have been appointed, and 7 wings have been folded, so that the light will not fall again." This text was long considered a metaphor until a niche containing 7 empty pedestals was discovered in the basement of the nearby cathedral. Their surfaces bore traces of pressure, precisely matching the dimensions of the figurines. This means they once stood there, perhaps guarding something the monks had chosen to forget. In the 20th century, the figurines were repeatedly analyzed. Infrared images revealed a structure within the stone distinct from its surface. Some scientists speculate that the figurines are hollow, but opening them was not permitted, officially for safety reasons, unofficially for fear of potential consequences. Once, while moving an exhibit, a mark resembling a wing print was left on the museum floor. It could not be removed until a consecration ceremony was performed. There's another, more ancient theory. Before the monastery, a Roman temple dedicated to Liber and Persephone stood on this site, where, according to historians, secret sacrifices were performed. Perhaps the figurines were created later, as a way to seal the remnants of this cult. But some details are unsettling. Tiny holes, as if made with a needle, remain on the lower parts of the sculptures. If you listen closely, a soft ringing sound, like a distant whisper, can be heard through them. The museum housing the figurines is closed at night, but security guards report that security cameras occasionally record faint movement in the display case, shadows shifting in position. The incident log contains several entries. The sound of wings was heard at 2 in the morning, the temperature gauge showed -7 in one room, and there were handprints on the glass from the inside. These were attributed to technical failures. But after each such incident, one employee resigned without explanation. Father Hernandez, an old Madrid priest who saw these figurines as a young man, said that each one of them held not a punishment, but a prayer. He asserted that there was no evil on their faces, only suffering. "They look neither up nor down," he said. "They look within themselves." Perhaps this is why locals leave candles at the museum's doors, even though no one encourages them to do so. Scholars continue to debate whether these are works of art, ancient religious symbols, or something more. But when you stand before the display case where the 7 figures are lined up, you feel not delight, but anxiety. It's as if you're looking not at them, but through them, into the void from which they came. And somewhere in the depths of the room, if you hold your breath, you can hear a soft sound, like the flapping of a wing that shouldn't be there. Thus Madrid guards its most silent secret, not in towers and palaces, but in the dungeons, where stone remembers what it shouldn't. And when a reddish moon rises over the city at night, the shadows of the 7 fallen angels seem to tremble beneath the glass, as if waiting for someone to dare to free them again. The Phantom of the Seville Theater. In the old quarter of Seville, on the narrow Calle de las Flores, stands the Teatro Santa Clara, a low building with darkened walls, whose windows reflect the streetlights in the evenings like living eyes. Tourists pass by, unaware that behind its facade lies a story that still leaves locals speechless. The theater is famous not for its repertoire, but for the rumored presence within it of someone who died on stage and never left. Locals simply call him El Espectro de la Voz, the ghost of the voice. Santa Clara opened in 1891, at a time when Seville was striving to become the cultural center of Andalusia. The first performance was grandiose, a tragedy about love and death, starring the renowned actor Ramiro Castaño. His voice was called "the sound that stops your breath." But it was this voice that sparked a legend. In the final act, when the hero was supposed to die from a wound, the actor suddenly collapsed on stage, not according to the script, but for real. His heart stopped, and the audience, thinking it was part of the performance, applauded. When the curtain fell, his body was carried out. They say Ramiro never left the theater after that. After that night, the actors began to notice strange things. Sometimes the stage would come alive without the lights. The curtains would flutter as if someone was passing by, and the microphones would pick up a quiet whisper. The musicians complained of coughing coming from the empty boxes before rehearsals, and the smell of an old dressing room, the powder, wax, and perfume Ramiro used, wafted through the auditorium. Technicians tried to locate the source of the sound, but each time, the instruments detected a noise emanating not from the air, but from the stage itself. In the 1920s, the theater nearly burned down. The fire started at night, and flames engulfed the curtain, but the fire department's archives recorded the following. The fire moved as if directed by a hand. One eyewitness reported seeing the figure of a man in 19th century attire standing center stage as flames raged around him. When the fire was extinguished, the stage remained almost intact, as if someone had contained the flames. After its restoration, the theater stood empty for a long time. It wasn't until the 1950s that it reopened for productions. Soon, it all started again. During a rehearsal, an actress lost consciousness. She claimed to have seen a man in an antique tailcoat smiling at her in the mirror behind her, though there was no one behind her. The director tried to attribute it to stress, but a week later, the same woman disappeared. She was found only the next morning, asleep on stage, her hands shaking and her voice frozen forever. She couldn't speak. In the 1960s, new sound systems were installed, and the sound engineer noticed that the microphones were occasionally picking up a voice that didn't belong to either the actors or the audience. It sounded in an old Castilian dialect, soft, almost tender, but the recording was empty. The source of the signal was neither on stage nor in the audience. When specialists tried to clean the recording, they heard the phrase, "No me aplaudas aún, don't applaud yet." After that, the tape began to disintegrate before their eyes. In the 1980s, a film about the theater's history was being shot at the theater. The cameras were recording footage of the stage when the lights suddenly went out. One of the frames later showed the silhouette of a man standing near the wings, his hand raised to his lips. The director refused to use this scene, and the entire film was lost during editing. Today, the Santa Clara is one of the oldest theaters in Seville. It's open, but every evening before the show begins, the lights in the auditorium dim for a second, as if someone were checking to see if the audience is ready. No one considers this a malfunction. On the contrary, the actors say that without this, the performance is doomed to failure. Before each performance, someone places a small candle on the dressing room windowsill, a memento of the person whose voice once filled this hall. But there's another detail, known only to the theater staff. In the archive room, there's an old mirror found backstage in 1891, the day of Castaño's death. Its surface has darkened, but if you stand in front of it at night, by the light of a lantern, you can detect a slight movement, as if someone is passing behind. A thin crack, resembling the shape of an open mouth, is visible in the middle of the mirror. Sometimes, late at night, when the city quiets down, the guards hear a low voice from behind the stage, quiet as a breath. Act 2. And a heavy rustle of fabric, as if the curtain were falling again. And then, silence. Scientists and skeptics alike attribute it all to the old building's acoustics, lighting, and a figment of the imagination. But Seville residents know the Teatro Santa Clara isn't dead. It's simply waiting for the voice that hasn't stopped for over 100 years to resound. And if you stay in the auditorium after the performance, when the audience has left and the cleaners are sweeping dust under the seats, you can hear footsteps across the empty stage. They are slow, confident, and each time they end with a sound resembling a bow. No one sees the actor, but everyone feels his presence. And in this silence, it becomes clear. Ramiro Castaño is still performing. It's just that now his audience is darkness, hidden camera in Escorial. The monastery of El Escorial rises among the gray mountains northwest of Madrid, still and cold, as if hewn from the very stone. Its austere facades reflect no light, and even the sky here seems duller than anywhere else in Spain. Since the 16th century, it has been not only the residence of kings, but also a symbol of power, where faith merged with science and fear with mystery. Within its dungeons, hidden beneath marble floors and chapels, for centuries existed a place known only to a few. People called it the Chamber of Silence. Though it was never officially mentioned in any document, this story began in 1943 when, during restoration work, a mason named Raphael Lugo discovered a thin crack in the wall on the lower level of the monastery. The stone gave way easily, as if someone had weakened the masonry beforehand. Beyond it lay a narrow passage leading down a spiral staircase carved into the rock. Lugo descended with a lantern and never returned. When workers found him 20 minutes later, he was unconscious, his face frozen in terror. When he came to, he said nothing. A few days later, he left the monastery and soon afterward, the city. After this incident, the staircase was walled up, but rumors of an underground chamber spread quickly. The priest denied its existence, but a 16th century document, a decree from Philip II ordering the construction of a hall of observation, was preserved in the El Escorial archives. The document was brief, lacking explanation, but contained a strange notation: for things not belonging to time. This phrase was accompanied by the signature of the architect Juan de Herrera, the same man who created the monastery's master plan. For many years, historians debated the meaning of these words. Some believed it referred to an alchemist's laboratory, where the nature of light was studied. Others believed that an underground observatory was connected to a system of mirrors that reflected the sun's rays on certain days of the year. But the locals held a different theory. According to legend, Philip II feared death more than anything else and dreamed of witnessing the moment the soul leaves the body. To this end, he commissioned craftsmen from Naples to create a device capable of holding the gaze of God. In the 1960s, engineer and archivist Julio Fernandez stumbled upon a drawing in the monastery library, tucked between the pages of an ancient treatise on optics. The diagram depicted rooms not found in the official plans. At the center was a circular room with 8 niches and the inscription, Ojo de Dios, the Eye of God. Each niche contained a mirror facing a central stone pedestal, encircled by a copper ring. Beneath the drawing was the inscription, He who sees will be seen. Fernandez presented his discovery to the monastery's leadership, but died of a stroke a week later, despite being young and healthy. His papers disappeared, and the drawing could not be found in any archive. Only a photograph remained, kept by a colleague, who later described the image as fading over time, like ink fading when exposed to light. In the 1990s, archaeologists received permission to explore the cellars of El Escorial. At a depth of 20 meters, they stumbled upon a walled-up corridor. The stone in this area had a different structure, and a faint warmth was felt within the wall. When instruments detected an unusual magnetic field, work was abruptly halted. The official reason was the risk of collapse. Unofficially, it was fear of what might lie beyond the wall. One of the expedition members admitted hearing a sound similar to breathing, as if air were passing through tiny cracks. There's an old letter written by a courtier of Philip II. It describes how the king once spent a night in a hall of light, where the walls reflected not his own image, but that of someone else. From then on, he became obsessed with redemption, ordering that the place never be reopened. The letter's author died a month later, and his grave remains unmarked. Today, El Escorial is open to tourists, but some of the underground chambers remain closed. Guides explain this by the need for restoration, although no official work is being carried out there. At night, the monastery descends into absolute silence, and then, they say, a faint ringing sound can be heard beneath the slabs like glass touching stone. Guards on duty below claim to occasionally see reflections on the walls, resembling silhouettes of people, even though no one is nearby. Scientists believe a complex light mechanism may have been built underground, harnessing the sun's rays passing through hidden shafts. But local residents are convinced this is more than just a trick of the optics. They claim the Chamber of Silence still exists, and anyone who descends without permission will see not light, but themselves, as God sees them. When you stand at the gates of El Escorial early in the morning, before dawn touches the towers, the air seems still. The stones seem to breathe, and the monastery's shadow falls across the valley like a seal. And at that moment, it seems as if somewhere underground a mirror slowly opens, reflecting not the sky, but memory, infinite, motionless, cold, like El Escorial itself. Spain is a country where history isn't simply written in stone, but continues to breathe underground, in walls and reflections. Its secrets are unlike the legends of other lands because they don't die. They wait. From the sunken cities of Cadiz to the monasteries of Galicia, from the blood-drenched rivers of Valencia to the mirrored halls of El Escorial, here every shadow belongs not only to the past, but also to what has yet to happen. There's no fiction in these stories, only the traces left by time. Archaeologists search for logic, priests remain silent, and people simply sense that Spain lives between worlds, between faith and knowledge, light and silence. Its land remembers pain and greatness, and above it, like an eternal bell, the breath of centuries resounds. When the sun sets behind the mountains and the wind picks up on the coast, it seems as if the entire country becomes one vast echo, where the past calls out to those who dare to listen. And if you listen closely, you can hear what unites all these secrets, the pulse of time, beating in stone, in water, and in people who still believe that Spain doesn't just hold secrets, it is a secret itself.